Jack.
Levi.
The Book Club from Hell.
Hello everyone, this is Jack with the Book Club from Hell, an online erotic Elon Musk roleplay community. Are you bored with today's superheroes? Not so interested in the travails of someone who can fly, or the struggles of the unnaturally strong? Well, what about people who are really good at running trains on time, producing more steel for less money, delivering value, innovating, being commercially agile, and making superhuman profits quarter on quarter? Now that's more like it. As it happens, someone has been writing such superhero fiction, and her name was Ayn Rand. Born in St. Petersburg as Elissa Rosenbaum in 1905, Rand's family suffered during the Russian Revolution, Civil War, and under the Bolsheviks. Emigrating to the United States of America in 1926, Rand began work as a screenwriter in Hollywood, going on to publish plays, novels, and non-fiction works, most notably The Fountainhead, and the subject of today's episode, the 1957 1,200-page doorstop Atlas Shrugged. It's a story which explores Rand's philosophy of objectivism, where Rand casts what are effectively commercially minded superheroes and collectivist supervillains against one another in a dystopian America, falling apart because of its lack of respect for industrialists and objectivists. Add to this a generous serving of Rand writing in her own sexual kinks, and you've got an overly long, bizarre, but nonetheless entertaining novel on your hands. Now, on the subject of objectivism and paying respects to the generation of prophets, Levi and I have an announcement to make. We've got a Patreon account. The link to it will be included in this episode's description. So if you feel like we're adding value to your life, please consider thanking us with hard currency. Enjoy. I had to change how I take notes for this book compared to other books that we cover for the podcast because it's so long. This will be probably the main thing I complain about this entire podcast. The book is so long.
Yeah, it's absolutely not amenable to I don't know.
Briefly summing it up.
Chapter by chapter or something like that. At least not for this show.
Chapter by chapter. That would be an entire podcast season in and of itself. In which case, if you'd want a chapter by chapter, just read the book.
Yeah,
it's 1,200 pages.
Have fun.
Of superhero fiction. I really think it most closely resembles superhero fiction.
Yeah.
Much more than anything else, because the characters all behave like superheroes or supervillains, and then you've got the mass of humanity, the 99% of the human race just scurrying around beneath the feet of the objectivist titans of industry, the rational superheroes. It's basically like if Elon Musk was Superman, and instead of having all of Superman's powers, he was just really good at organizing stuff and making cash.
Yeah, I think it is basically a superhero story.
Yeah, and the super villains. Well, it's a morality play. It's a morality absolute brick of a novel, in which there are three characters. There's the mass of humanity is one. All the objectivist characters behave in more or less the same way, but can be quite amusing. And then all of the scum of the earth, the irrational, all behave in the same way as well and deliver the same speeches. And they're my favourite part of the book, probably. They're just, as much as I will complain about Ayn Rand in the course of this episode, her ability to write characters who are just so detestable is incredible. Some of the characters, like Lillian, Hank Rearden's wife, is such an awful person. James Taggart is such a piece of shit. That's when she's at her best. That and physical descriptions of people. I've noticed that she must have been a hardcore physiognomist, because you can immediately pick how good a character will be. How good morally, of course, based on how they look. So if she introduces a character and they're tall and they've got a violent face, everything in this book is violent and ruthless, if it's good. If they have a ruthless, violent, well-defined face with long lines that remind her of smokestacks of a well-run steel foundry, then you know that character is going to be an upstanding citizen. Whereas all the gross characters will be short, fat, with a big nose, and they stutter in their speech and their clothes all suck. I've collected a lot of her physical descriptions of the main characters, and my theory just holds for my theory holds for everyone except for Dr. Stadler, whom we'll discuss, who used to be good, which is why he still has that the residual good looks. But as the book goes on, he gets uglier and uglier.
So, where should we start? What do you reckon? High plot summary, and then maybe setting of like what's the world?
Yeah, let's like. How about, can you
sales
quickly
pitch.
say what Atlas Shrugged is, and then we'll do a quick run through of the plot to give people a brief idea. It is not going to be an exhaustive description of the plot because that would take so long.
No. It's 1,200 pages. So Atlas Shrugged is Ayn Rand's magnum opus with regards to fiction, at least, and I think probably her entire career. So it turns out I was looking at. I'm pretty sure that she did not write any more fiction after Atlas Shrugged. She just wrote all non-fiction afterwards. Which is really interesting. And I suppose it's a sci-fi summary of her ethical outlook on the world, and it's also I think it's also like a social critique, both of like where she came from. So she came from Moscow, from like Soviet Russia, and also like a critique of certain aspects of what she saw in the US, and that's basically like pursuing one's self-interest, and things like greatness, beauty, doing things just because it's awesome to do whatever the thing is, without justifying it as like, oh, it's good for the world, or it's good for this like social thing, or it's good for society, or something like that. Versus like what she, I guess, thought of as like essentially, the way that I heard somebody put it was, should you live your life for, no, this is the way that she put it. She said, should you, for centuries, societies have been arguing over, should you live your life for God? Or then it was like, should you live your life for society or for a community or something like that? And she's like, no, you should live your life for yourself. And that's it. And so that's like the underlying theme of what she thinks. And it comes through in all of her characters, and the entire like structure of the society that she's created.
Yeah, it's good of you to bring up her Soviet origins, because I do think that informs a lot of her worldview, as like naturally growing up in Soviet era Moscow would, and also the reception she received, because The Fountainhead, which was the novel preceding Atlas Shrugged, and Atlas Shrugged was published in the mid-50s.
Yeah, 57. I think.
So, Cold War, was Stalin 50? No, Stalin died in 55 or something. So it would have been Khrushchev. So height of the Cold War, when she released Atlas Shrugged. And at least the Republican Party in the United States just went bonkers for this stuff. They love it. Ronnie Reagan, who, well, I mean, he came to the party pretty late, because I don't think he was around in 57, or at least not in politics. He was really passionate about this book. I think in part too because during that period, many authors tended to lean left. And so you had this author who was saying just fire-breathing right-wing stuff. And so this whole side of politics, also fire-breathing right-wing stuff that supported their particular brand of politics enough. There are certain things that she disagreed with them on, particularly her antipathy towards religion. But they milled around her because she was offering them an artistic and an intellectual framework within which to justify how they were already behaving. Because it blows my mind that this book is as popular as it is.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, it does, because one is the length. Two is, I think the concept of it is a lot of fun. I was saying to you before we started recording, just the concept of the brightest minds in society going on strike and retreating to this valley in the mountains of Colorado and like trading with each other in gold and being really good objectivists is so good. That's, if I'd heard it, I would have assumed it was a humorous novel. Ayn Rand is in a few parts quite funny, but she's not aiming to be funny.
No.
There's that. There's the sheer strangeness of the concept. When I say it's a superhero novel, it just straight up is
The strangeness of the like the book's narrative.
Yeah, it's like it's superhero fiction, but about titans of industry.
Yeah.
Then there are certain aspects of it that are more subjective, but I've certainly heard these criticisms made by people other than me that it's overwritten, repetitive, quite bloated. She keeps killing the pacing of the story by making a character deliver a 20-page speech about the virtues of selfishness, which, like, if she didn't just keep doing it and make them deliver more or less the same speech, I'll be more forgiving of. And in short, it needed a few more editorial passes. There are numerous reasons why I'm just surprised, or I would be surprised in a vacuum that this book did it as well as it did, but I think she released it at just the right moment. 50s Cold War, paranoia. She's got a great background story. A Russian woman who emigrated to the United States. She just hates communism. She hates the Bolsheviks. She's all about individuality and the free market. She, to her credit, and this is pretty wild, she learned English well enough not only to get by, but to write books in it. And she doesn't, I'm sure if there were oddities of her English, the editor probably would have picked them up, but even then, her English doesn't come across as that of a non-native speaker. Yeah, I'm saying in a long, perhaps Randian, overlong way, that I think in large part the book's success is down to when it came out. I don't think this book would never have found an audience. I just think it would have been much more niche than it is in our timeline, in this branch of the multiverse. Because this is one of the more mainstream books we've covered. Mainstream as in people
It's probably the
have heard
most
of
mainstream book.
But very few have read it.
I guess it depends, like Job, the Bible. We've read parts of the Bible. That's pretty mainstream.
Yeah, that's true. That's pretty mainstream. That's the world's largest religion.
Yeah, probably the most.
Soon to be supplanted by objectivism. Oh, we should actually say, because I've used the term a few times, objectivism is Ayn Rand's philosophy. That initially using her novels, she sought to explicate. So The Fountainhead, which was the novel before Atlas Shrugged, did so. Atlas Shrugged elucidates objectivist thought even more thoroughly. I read The Fountainhead quite a while ago. I don't remember her going off into quite as many really just character monologues where they read to you from their script the virtues of objectivism and the tenets of objectivism. But I think it was in there, but it was more woven into the plot. And yeah, after this one, she just went straight up into writing non-fiction books about what objectivism is.
Yeah, and objectivism is, well, I think there's a number of parts to it, but at least as far as I've seen, there's two main parts. There's ethics, and there's epistemology.
Yeah, and they're really hard to separate.
Very hard to
in objectivism.
Yeah, and the kind of main thrust of the ethics is that you should live for yourself. Like, you shouldn't do anything for other people. You should, like, if you want to have a relationship, you have that relationship because you want to have that relationship, not because of some, I don't know, like sense of duty or whatever to have it. And like being productive is like probably the most important thing.
That is just the best thing.
Yeah, this thing, like being productive, like creating art, creating architecture, creating industries and all that sort of stuff. So she loves engineering and shit like that.
And being good looking.
And she thinks, and I think this bridges between ethics and epistemology. Like she thinks that sort of like, how would you put it?
I think the bridge between ethics and epistemology and objectivism is that the greatest good of a person is to act rationally.
Yeah. So reason and rationality is
in
like
her
central.
telling, rationality really equals acting as an objectivist. And what rationality means, and we'll end up discussing this quite a lot because she illustrates this quite well, I think, with her characters. Like she demonstrates how she probably should have told the rest of Atlas Shrugged, in that she explained philosophical concepts using the plot instead of grinding everything to a halt. And it's like, it's lecture time. Francisco D'Ancona is going to tell us all about objectivism for 30 pages. But being rational means recognizing objective reality. And she says human beings have access to objective reality, and a rational human will act in accordance with objective reality. And acting in accordance with objective reality naturally makes you behave in a certain way. It makes you behave in an ethical way towards others, and most importantly, towards yourself. And I think that's the real bridge between objectivist ethics and objectivist epistemology. And when I say they're hard to separate, I think actually you just can't separate them in objectivism.
Yeah.
They're just outgrowths of the same thing.
They can't be separated. I'd agree with that. And so
I guess it's probably at its core epistemological, because without that tenet of human beings have access to objective reality, then you wouldn't know how you're rationally supposed to act. So it is at its core, I guess, just an epistemological system from which she derives all of these ethical principles.
Yeah, I wonder what came first. I have a suspicion that maybe the ethics came first, and then she worked backwards.
I think
that.
she. My guess is that she grew up in a repressive, grey, fairly unpleasant society. She left Moscow during the 50s, which was not a particularly fun time, nor fun place to be. I expect a lot of her epistemology is derived from those personal experiences. And I don't say that to say that they're wrong. I think working from that point of, okay, what do I not like, is a reasonable way to derive some ethical principles, and then from that derive a broader worldview.
So should we give a high level, set up the story?
Yeah, let's set up the story. And as we go through the story and meet characters, we can introduce the characters, because a lot of these characters, they're sort of like Orwell characters in that they just exist to illustrate or to communicate a particular idea. For example, Dagny Taggart, who's probably the main character of the novel, or who just is the main character of the novel, I don't need to say probably.
Yeah.
Is an objectivist titan of industry. When it comes to running railroads, she's an absolute animal, just a monster. She's optimized as fuck. She's been doing her cold showers every morning. She's been doing her high intensity interval training. And she is just an incredible businesswoman, but is being hamstrung by her shithead brother, who's the opposite of an objectivist. But these two characters, Dagny Taggart and her brother James Taggart, their role, I feel, is less to be compelling characters, which I didn't really find them to be, but more to illustrate tenets of objectivism. So Dagny Taggart is the objectivist hero whom we should model our behaviour on and look to as a model of good objectivist behaviour. And conversely, James Taggart refuses to take responsibility for anything. He's ugly. He's not very good at running things. He always runs away from difficult problems. And he's the opposite of rationality, because he does see on some level what reality is, that he needs to behave in a certain way to run Taggart Transcontinental, which is the USA-wide railroad that he and his sister run. But he doesn't behave in that way because it goes against his beliefs, which are incorrect beliefs.
Yeah, here's a...
And the book...
And just for the context, it's interesting that James and Dagny are like brother and sister, and they inherited the company from their grandfather built it. So it's kind of this
So was Nat Taggart their
industrial.
granddad?
Yeah, Nat Taggart was their grandfather. Yeah, so it's like American industrial aristocracy sort of vibes.
Yeah, and Ayn Rand doesn't have a problem with inherited wealth, which I find interesting because
Yeah.
going into this book, I sort of expected that she would resent it, but she basically says, look, if you're rational and competent and you can handle it, yeah, fine, whatever. Inherit your wealth. So that was something that surprised me. So the book opens with this situation where Taggart Transcontinental it's been run by James and the board. I think the board is just this ambiguous mass of people. I don't even know how many people are on the board, but they've been making stupid decisions for ages. And I think Dagny Taggart, what is Dagny? Is she like COO or something like that? Dagny basically runs the
something like
entire
that. Yeah, chief of
railroad.
operations or
Yeah,
something to that effect. Basically, 2IC who actually does everything, but isn't the actual CEO.
so I'm just looking for a quote that tells us about how Dagny looks, because she does look good, and that's really, really important. So you keep telling us about the start of the story. I'm just finding my quotes on how James and Dagny look.
Okay, so while Jack is looking that up, basically it's set in a futuristic America. So it's a science fiction novel, and it's an America that is degrading. It's primarily set in New York, although Colorado is also another major part of the story, which we can get to. And basically, for whatever reason, the society is corrupted, such that all the most industrious people in the society are being robbed in various ways, in various sly ways, by the state essentially,
They're getting taxed.
or by appendages of the state. And for some reason, the last, I think, if the timeline's correct, something like 10 years or something, the most like industrious people all of a sudden are like retiring or disappearing and no longer working, refusing to work. And there's a meme in the zeitgeist, a question that comes up: who is John Galt? And it's supposed to sort of encapsulate the idea of like, well, I mean, I think there's maybe multiple meanings, but it is like, don't ask meaningless questions. And it's a kind of mark of like depression and the lack of motivation of people to try to achieve things. And yeah, so we get introduced to our main character, Dagny, who is an exceptionally brilliant, I think she trained as an engineer or something in university, and she's obsessed with trains, obsessed with engines, all that sort of stuff. And she's basically trying to save her family's railway company from the brink of destruction, as her incompetent brother essentially seems to be doing everything he can to drive it into the ground. And so it's the unfolding of her challenge with her brother, but more broadly her fight against this sort of spirit of malaise in the society and the degradation of the society, and all the things that she has to do in her fight to do that, to save her family's company.
And that's some aspects of Dagny's characterization become a bit more interesting when you see her motivations for wanting to keep Taggart Transcontinental alive, because she feels this deep connection to Nat Taggart. So it was her granddad, the guy who set it up?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, or maybe great grandfathers.
one
I'm
of
pretty sure it
her
was
ancestor
grandfather.
who set up.
I'm pretty sure it's her grandfather.
Yeah. Who set it up. She feels this deep need to do well by him.
Yeah,
So I guess maybe she's doing that for herself. She feels that she needs to live up to him in order to feel good about herself, because it wouldn't make too much sense for her to do it out of some feeling of indebtedness to him.
no.
I've
There's
got
almost a
I've got
eugenics-y
description of
part
Dagny.
where he's like, it's almost like, yeah, we're awesome. We come from these like awesome family. Her and what's his name? Antonio D'Anconia. No, I'm fucking
D'Anconia, yeah.
D'Anconia. Francisco D'Anconia. Where they're basically saying like, yeah, we're fucking super smart and shit, and it's our grandfather, and it's like, of course we're awesome. Look how awesome our grandfathers were.
No, there are a few moments in which I think that she believes strongly in a hereditary aristocracy of objectivist
Of
titles
competence.
of industry.
But clearly she doesn't think that it's
Of
inherent because she set up James Taggart to be just a completely incompetent scumbag. So she doesn't. I guess she doesn't necessarily think. It's
James inherited all the bad bits.
Yeah, of course.
Like there, of every pair of alleles, Dagny got the good ones, and James got all the shit ones.
Yeah.
Of Dagny, I quote, "Her leg sculptured by the tight sheen of the stocking, its long line running straight over an arched instep to the tip of a foot in a high-heeled pump, had a feminine elegance that seemed out of place in the dusty train car and oddly incongruous with the rest of her. She wore a battered camel's hair coat that had been expensive, wrapped shapelessly around her slender, nervous body. The coat collar was raised to the slanting brim of her hat. A sweep of brown hair fell back, almost touching the line of her shoulders. Her face was made of angular planes, the shape of her mouth clear-cut, a sensual mouth held closed with inflexible precision. She kept her hands in the coat pockets, her posture taut, as if she resented immobility, and unfeminine, as if she were unconscious of her own body and that it were a woman's body."
Yeah.
So Dagny, at several points in this book, there's the realization, and again, characters have this realization multiple times, where they initially just see Dagny as sexless, almost this object of will that just gets trains running on time. That's what Dagny is. And then every now and then she puts on nice clothes and everyone's blown away at how good Dagny looks.
Yeah, and there's this running theme of her being not only like viewed as not feminine, but actually a man. Like people mistaking her for a man, or her thinking of herself as basically a man, which actually is to the degree that is she Mary Janing, like inserting herself as the main character. She kind of
Dagny is 100% a self-insert.
Except that obviously Ayn
She's
Rand
definitely a self-insert.
Ayn Rand wasn't an engineer or whatever, or a
Ayn Rand
mogul.
wasn't many things, but
but in terms of like
Dagny is basically the dream fulfillment.
Yes, and I imagine that she would probably just say, "Yeah, that's."
I'm not saying it
right.
against it. Like, okay, you want to write an idealized version of yourself into your book? Yeah, go for it.
And or what she aspires to, and importantly, like, there was this one because I've been reading about Ayn Rand's life just in preparation for this episode. There was this one instance where somebody called her a man, tried to call Ayn Rand a man, and as an insult, and she's like, "That's the greatest compliment anybody's ever paid me." Like, she was really obsessed with not necessarily being a man, but I think that she had so many hang-ups about like the way that women were treated and conceptualized with like in terms of intellectualism and stuff, that she really idealized kind of masculinity.
Yeah. And once we've gone over the plot, we should discuss her view of women, because I've heard this book described as very sexist and anti-woman, and I
Really?
don't think that's quite
got the
fair. I
opposite.
think it's more complicated than that.
I thought
and
this was
probably
like.
warrants us talking about it.
Anyways, yeah, we can talk about that after we go through the plot a bit. But yeah, I almost got the opposite view. I was like, anyways, it's fine.
Yeah, it's different. I've also got a quote here describing how James Taggart looks. So, a mirror hung in the niche behind the portable bar. He caught a glimpse of his own figure, the tall body distorted by a sloppy, sagging posture, as if in deliberate negation of human grace, the thinning hair, the soft, sullen mouth. So that's James Taggart. Remember the sharply defined lines of Dagny? Well, James is pudgy, he's balding, he's got a bad posture. And this goes for just every character. If they're good, they look good. If they're bad, they look bad. We should probably also mention, so one example of how James keeps screwing up Taggart Transcontinental is he decides on this line into Mexico called the San Sebastian line, a rail line. And this is to supply the San Sebastian mines, which are copper mines, started by Francisco de Anconia, who's going to be another really important character. Childhood friend of Dagny's, childhood acquaintance of James's. He runs D'Anconio Copper, which is the world's largest corporation, and he's just good at everything. He's quite a boring character because there's just nothing he's not good at.
Literally just does something the first time. The first time he does it, he's better than everybody else.
He smashes it out of the park. He's a bit more interesting in his role as basically of being in love with Dagny and just watching her move through a succession of other men, which we'll get to Ayn Rand's sexual hang-ups, or what look like her sexual hang-ups based on this book, but also other books of hers that I've read. We'll get to that after the plot synopsis, because that's pretty funny. And I've got to wait a sec. Yeah. So anyway, Francisco de Anconia tells everyone that he's made these copper mines and named them the San Sebastian mines in Mexico, and they're going to be incredible. They're going to be the best copper mines ever. No one bothers checking what he's done. Everyone just starts buying up, I think, bonds of de Anconia Copper. All of the parasites of society put their money secretly into the bonds. And James Taggart has such high confidence in Francisco that he just builds a train line there, even though Dagny keeps telling him, no, Mexico is a people's state, and they're going to nationalize that line in a second. They spend tons of money on it, and eventually Mexico just nationalizes the mines and the railroad, and so Taggart Transcontinental loses money on it. Francisco de Anconia was actually lying to everyone about how good the mines were, and so the people's state nationalizes just a pile of rocks, and then starts demanding reparations from Francisco de Anconia because he misled them into thinking that they were gonna requisition from him something valuable. I found that part very funny.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if it was intended to be comedy, but there are a few moments when Ayn Rand is it's very funny.
It's almost like it's satirical.
I'll give her the benefit of the
satirical.
doubt. She does it a few times where she's quite funny in a very particular way, but genuinely amusing. Francisco de Anconia. Nobody ever wondered whether Francisco de Anconia was good looking or not. It seemed irrelevant. When he entered a room, it was impossible to look at anyone else. His tall, slender figure had an air of distinction, too authentic to be modern, and he moved as if he had a cape floating behind him in the wind. People explained him by saying that he had the vitality of a healthy animal, but they knew dimly that that was not correct. He had the vitality of a healthy human being, a thing so rare that no one could identify it. He had the power of certainty. Yeah, so from that description, we know that Francisco de Anconia, despite what it might appear in the first probably half of the book, he is a good character. He's a good person. And at this stage of the book, right at the start, he's this dissolute multi-billionaire. Well, it doesn't specify exactly how much money he has, but I assume he's a multi-billionaire if he's the owner of...
Yeah.
And I presume largest stockholder of the largest company in the world. he's got tons of money, but he's just this dissolute playboy who floats around the world having parties, wasting money on stuff, having sex with lots and lots of beautiful women. But every now and then just making brilliant business decisions as well. So people still know that he's got it, hence why they trusted him so much with the San Sebastian mines.
Mm.
But the character arc of Francisco will become more complicated. Should probably also introduce Hank Rearden here, because Hank Rearden is another very important character.
Was there anybody else
first?
before?
No, the
Rearden
second.
that would.
The second of Dagny's conquest.
Is there anybody other than Rearden who comes up early in the book? So we've got.
There's Lillian, Rearden's wife,
Dagny,
and she's one of my favourite characters.
Dagny James. Oh, obviously, there's a minor character who actually I think plays a more important role than maybe the amount of time he gets. But what was his name? His name was William.
This Eddie Willers.
Eddie Willers. Yeah, he's like
he's really important.
Yeah, he's like Dagny's like confidant and
little bitch,
and they were like childhood
she's his
friends.
beta orbiter.
Yeah. Special assistant.
He's been orbiting her since childhood, hoping that if he's nice to her, she'll let him sniff the chair she sits on or something like that.
Yeah.
He's an important character, I think. When we get to discussing rationality versus intelligence, Eddie's a really good character for digging into that.
Yeah, so
because he's rational. He sees reality, and even when he doesn't like it, he doesn't look away.
Yeah.
But he doesn't have the intellectual firepower that people like Dagny or Hank Rearden or Francisco have.
Yeah. So maybe he's the only other important person because he ends up playing an important sort of plot role.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's basically the two. He's like childhood friends, and then ends up being like inside of Transcontinental, like basically Dagny's like personal assistant or executive assistant sort of vibes.
Yeah. And he's one of the few people in the organization that she can trust to get anything done because, as you said earlier, there are fewer and fewer competent people in America. And at this stage, no one knows why. It just seems to be getting harder to find them. And the few who are competent keep mysteriously leaving. So, for example, Owen Kellogg is a minor character, but he's a competent worker at Taggart Transcontinental, and he just resigns one day, and Dagny's offering him pay rises, promotions, saying, take your pick of the jobs, I want you to stay on because I can trust you to get things done. And he
just won't take it.
In typical superhero novel fashion, he's very mysterious, going like,
no.
I cannot tell you why I've made this choice, Dagny, but you must trust me. I don't do it out of hate. I only do it out of love.
I must.
It's a fucking
no choice.
Batman.
Nothing that you can say.
Batman dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very Batman-esque, that's sure.
And he pops up a few times throughout the book in different roles. Like he's working as a manual labourer while I think it's Mr. Moen, who's some shit idiot, irrational business owner who screwed over Dagny. And he's complaining about how unfair it is that all of these businesses are moving from the East Coast to Colorado. And it's just because there's business activity in Colorado and not here. Well, they need to stay here to give us a chance. And Owen Kellogg's just like kind of laughing at him while he's looking really, really good, stacking steel girders or something like that.
Yeah, rippling muscles. So, yeah.
Yeah, and she spends a lot of time describing how good he looks. Working away manually.
Yeah.
Anyway, Hank Rearden is probably is another really important character. So he's another superhero and a good one. So he's a steel magnate, and he just can pour steel like no one else. It's unreal. When you order something from Hank Rearden, he just fucking delivers. And this is in contrast with Orrin Boyle, which even
literally the name,
the aesthetics of the two names, Hank Rearden versus Orrin Boyle. And Orrin Boyle is also short and fat and ugly, whereas Hank Rearden's really tall with a square
masculine.
jaw. really
Stoic.
manly looking. Yeah. Oren Boyle runs, I think it's like Associated Steel, and he's a shithead. He's just full of excuses, never delivers anything on time, blames everything except himself. It's in stark contrast with Hank Rearden. And Oren Boyle throughout this book, more at the start, maybe the first half of the book, because Oren Boyle fades in significance as the book goes on. But for the first half of the book, he's just trying everything he can think of to get in the way of Hank Rearden making lots of steel and eventually Rearden metal. Just trying to use his government contacts to throw obstacles in the path of Hank. Hank is really important because he comes up with this metal called Rearden metal, and it's this green-blue super metal which is lighter and stronger than steel, and initially no one believes in it because it's untested, but also Oren Boyle uses his contacts in the press, in Washington, with the State Sciences Institute, which you can't trust because it's a state institution. It's there in the name. All of these organisations cast doubt on the safety of Rearden metal. I think the unions try to prevent their workers from working with Rearden metal, so it's really hard to find people to make things with the metal. And that a lot of that is Oren Boyle's doing because he's not good at competing on his merits. He's only good at trying to undermine his competition. And the plot arc of Hank Rearden's interesting because Hank Rearden is obviously highly intelligent and in the area of business, very rational. He sees reality as it is and acts on it, which is why he's such a good businessman. But when it comes to interpersonal relations, he's quite irrational. And this is I think his character arc is one of the places where Ayn Rand demonstrates that rationality can exist in one sphere of your life, in the case of Hank Rearden's in his business, but not in another. Interpersonally, he's quite irrational. And through the character of Hank Rearden, she shows us that we really should come upon a unity of rationality throughout our lives. And he comes to be a rational man in his private life as well as in his business life. Through having sex with Dagny, I should say. Dagny just fucks some sense into him.
Yeah, it's yeah, that bit's
No, when I say that,
hilarious.
I'm not exaggerating. Like, his personal transformation of being pushed around by his wife Lillian, who is just revolting. She's such a good character. She's so unpleasant. And being pushed around by his family who live rent-free in his house and just constantly complain about him and talk about how he's greedy and selfish and never thinks of others and only thinks about business and how he's not... I think Hank Rearden's brother, Philip, keeps donating to the Friends of Global Progress, which is just this cartoonish charity organisation in the book.
Yeah, and I think Rearden...
do nothing but complain about Hank Rearden while taking his money.
Rearden,
which is
is just like
funny.
paying for everything for these people's lives, especially his brother.
And Hank was also he's pretty anti-sex initially. So Hank, as befits all red-blooded, square-jawed men, has just an animalistic sex drive.
And probably just a massive dick. Huge dick.
Yeah,
Huge,
she did not describe his
chiseled dick.
dimensions, but I imagine he's very generous.
What's that word that she really fucking likes? Angular. She likes things that are
everything's
angular.
There are a few Ayn Rand words like angular, violent, ruthless, unyielding.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because I remember when she described
of those adjectives could be used to describe his penis.
unyielding.
But he's got this huge sex drive, but feels ashamed of it. And Lillian keeps telling him that sex is an animal act, and it makes people no better than animals, or it demonstrates that people are no better than animals. And Lillian is very anti-objectivist, and she's just constantly trying to talk him down, talk him out of making any big business decisions, constantly mocking him.
Mm.
But Hank meets Dagny, and eventually they have sex, and she becomes his mistress. And Dagny, through just probably how mind-blowing her sex is, teaches him to accept that basically if it feels good, it can't be bad.
Yeah.
And then having realized that his sex life with Dagny is in no way shameful, he undergoes this profound transformation and becomes the objectivist Superman.
So those, maybe I'll just note here that the book is split into three major parts, or three parts. It essentially, it could have been written as three separate books, each of which would be about 400 pages long and would be sufficient. So you could have read it as a trilogy. She could have released it as a trilogy. And in fact, there's a film series that is split up as a trilogy along the three parts. I think if you're going into it, I would encourage people, if any of our listeners are going to potentially read this book, think of it more as like a trilogy. That way, it might seem a little bit less like intimidating, because then you can just stop reading after the first part if you're no longer interested. But yeah, so she's basically the first part, which what's the first part called again? It's called like non-contradiction. The first part,
I got it in front of me.
Yeah, the first part is called non-contradiction. The second part is called either or.
Non-contradiction.
And the third part is called A is A, which in objectivist epistemology is Ayn Rand's idea of the law of identity. So she's borrowing heavily from like first order, second order logic. Anyways, I found it really weird that she named it that. But anyways, the first part is basically setting up the world. It's like 400 pages of essentially world building and character building. And whilst you don't like, I got to the end of the first part and felt like, okay, I have a really rich sense of like the characters, and there's like this strong sense of like there's all these really highly productive people like Dagny, like trying to do things like build businesses and all that sort of stuff, and like the society is closing in around them. I got this like strong sense of these people are like slowly suffocating. They're like a mouse in a cage, like getting away from a snake or something. And I think she did a really good job of doing that. And basically like the last chapter of the first part like sets up this like kind of cliffhanger of like, oh, they're, you know, making this breakthrough on like a thing that they get interested in, which we can talk about. And then I almost feel as though like it was the second and third part where like the story, like it's still very long, but there was more movement through the story rather than like as much world building.
And in terms of the plot movement, that's one of my biggest complaints about this book, is that when she kind of forgets that she wants to just lecture you on what objectivism is, she actually paces the book quite well. It moves along nicely. I think every conversation is probably about 50% longer than it needs to be, because they tend to repeat themselves a lot. And when I say that, the conversations are almost invariably between an objectivist and a non-objectivist. So it'll be like Hank Rearden talking with someone sent by the government to demand that Hank Rearden sign over or donate the formula to Rearden Metal for the good of the country and for the good of humanity. And this person sent by the government will just start talking about how in our time, there's no longer any room for ideals or for heroes. You must be practical, and you must acknowledge the situation that you are placed in, and you must act in accordance with practical goals. And then they'll start saying like, and anyway, there is no such thing as truth. There are only interpretations. And then Hank Rearden will start going, or try to pour me a ton of steel without firm rules, and pull out some objectivist nuggets of wisdom, many of which I actually quite liked. Like the whole thing about, pour me X amount of metal without reference to rules. That makes sense. Like it's hard to argue with. But the problem is, like, she will make that point of, okay, Hank Rearden is rational and this person talking to them is irrational. And you have your fun of watching again, her very well-written, unpleasant characters come up against the brick wall of an unyielding objectivist. But then she'll repeat herself and it just goes on for too long. These conversations need to be cut down. But even with those overlong conversations, there is this sense of forward momentum.
Yeah.
But then maybe the worst part of the book is she just grinds everything to a halt and has a character deliver a monologue for tens of pages, and it's just painful. It kills the pacing. The book feels so disjointed because of it. And I'm more irritated with Ayn Rand's editor. Whoever edited this book, I don't know what they were doing. So clearly Ayn Rand can't self-edit, and that's fine. Plenty of good authors can't self-edit. And that the job of an editor is to say, look, you don't need this. We need to get rid of it. I don't know what the fuck this editor was doing. Just went on smoko for however long this book took to edit. Probably just like it got... Maybe the editor was not an objectivist. He was sent this tome and looked at it and was like, I can't be fucked, I'm going on holiday. Comes back in 6 weeks, just sends the thing back without any amendments, goes, yep, Ayn Rand, mate, it's perfect. Just publish this.
Nailed it.
Like, I don't know what the fuck they were doing. They just did not do what Ayn Rand hired them to do. Maybe she just, apparently she was quite a difficult person. Maybe she just hired them to agree with her.
She just unbelievably difficult.
She just hired an editor that she knew would tell her what she wanted to hear and not what she needed to hear.
Like she venerates being uncompromising. Like this is like a key part of her entire philosophy. It's like, no, do the thing that you think is the best thing to do and don't compromise on that. Don't fuck around with any of these like plebs that want to like cut you down. So yeah, this is like obviously.
The thing is, and this is one of the problems with her philosophy, is you could equally say that about the editor, telling her, no, you need to change this.
Yeah, both of them are just like not backing down.
So long as there is only one actor in the world with any sort of capacity to change the world around them, objectivism works. As soon as you have two who might have differing points of view, it becomes a lot more complicated.
It's like trying to get objectivists to like.
That's probably the worst bit about the book is that she keeps just grinding the plot to a halt so she can tell you about how clever her philosophy is, and those parts I just hated. They're so bad. They really hurt how good the book is. Because she could have had just one or two of these speeches because they tend to be just the same, but. She just can't help herself. She needs so many of them.
Yeah, this was. Anyways, so back to the plot. End of part one. Yeah, basically, Reardon. Oh, sorry. No, there was one really important part about like part one.
How about we bring up some of the regulations, like the anti-dog-eat-dog rule. And the equalization of opportunity.
Maybe I think I've got to set a little bit more plot context. Just give me. I'll take like 30 seconds. So one of the key things they're trying to do is build a railway into Colorado in order to supply this guy named Ellis Wyatt with basically trains for his oil fields. Dagny wants the rails made out of Reardon metal, and in particular there's a bridge that is made out of Reardon metal and it's like cheaper and it's lighter than a steel bridge, and they end up running the train on this train line at 100 miles an hour instead of 60 miles an hour, and they do it with like more carts than normal and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah. And
then at the end of...
And Dagny and Hank Reardon ride in the locomotive just to prove how much they believe in Reardon.
Yeah. And then the only other major part one plot part that I think, unless you think there's any other plot important thing to set up, is that in their affair, Dagny and Hank end up going on like a week long like joyride through whatever state, Wisconsin or something, and it's like really run down. There are closed factories, closed mines, and they go to one in particular, an old car factory, and they like search through it, and they end up finding a motor or the designs for a motor, or like the remnants of a motor and some like designs where the motor is like outstanding. It's like some new technology that's just, imagine like fusion or something, like stable cold fusion or something like that. This amazing motor with unbelievable energetic properties that, if Dagny had this motor for her trains, it would revolutionize trains, it would revolutionize aviation, it would revolutionize like the entire economy. And that's kind of like one of the closing things towards the end of part one. Were there any other major plot points? And then we can get into some of the themes that come up in part one.
In terms of Ellis Wyatt, I just want to mention that he's basically fracking. Like his
it's shale,
his
right?
way of the whole thing is just shale oil. I just love it that one of the main characters in this, his superpower is basically fracking. It's just so good. Those are the parts of the book that I really liked. Just how funny that is. It's just such a good concept.
And again, because he's an objectivist, like Ellis Wyatt's just...
Oh yeah, and he's really good.
He's an animal. Like, he's really fucking good at everything that he does. He basically saves Colorado, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of other stuff, like there are plenty of quite funny things, like the regulations that, for example, the Association of Railroads or something, which is basically a union, put together the anti-dog eat dog rule to choke out competition. The government implements the Equalization of Opportunity Bill, which, among other things, basically just nationalizes the output of Hank Rearden's steel mills.
Yeah, and in like really, really perverse ways. Like, what was one of the ways they did? It's like they introduced something like
a lot of the stuff the government does is, again, it's pretty funny actually, and especially the terms they couch there, like effectively just theft in, is really funny.
It was the Equalization of Opportunity Act, where they had to Rearden was expected to give all his customers equal opportunity. So he'd get his customer list and he'd have to give them all the same amount of...
No, that's called the fair share law.
Oh yeah, later on, yeah. And what was the...
Everyone has to get a fair share.
What was the Equalization of Opportunity?
After the resounding success of the first... Well, I think it's... The fair share law came because you had everyone was, or the media, the state science apparatus and Washington were all trying to kill off the John Galt line, which was the rail line that Dagny was building to supply Colorado. And she named it the John Galt line because everyone keeps saying, who is John Galt? And it's built with Rearden metal. But once there's such a resounding success in the first... you wouldn't call it a maiden voyage. I don't know what the equivalent of a maiden voyage is for a train, but the train's maiden voyage on this new line, everyone suddenly wants Rearden metal.
I think it's just called the first run.
Because they now see, it's so good.
They just call it the first run in the book.
Yeah, first run, I guess.
The first run of the train.
Yeah, after the first run. And it's after the first run that Rearden and Dagny have sex. So they dominate the world with their engineering capacity and then have sex. And Randian's sex scenes are really something. They're all about,
I really like them.
They're very competitive, highly competitive sex scenes.
Yeah, not sure if they're really... There's an element of... there's definitely a lot of hate fucking, or maybe not hate fucking, a strong mixture of emotions.
I am very, very confident in saying, and this is also based on my experience of reading The Fountainhead, Ayn Rand really liked being treated roughly.
Yeah, 100%.
I guarantee she liked being slapped in the face, spat on, held down. All of the sex scenes in her books are basically like a woman is found by a powerful objectivist man who just takes what he wants, which is more than a little bit rapey. And initially she doesn't like it, but she
wants it to be as
to
close to rape as possible without actually, Dagny pulled her arm and smiled.
Ayn Rand Ayn Rand 100% had a rape fantasy. In Atlas Shrugged, actually, the sex scenes are more consensual than in The Fountainhead.
In the Fountainhead, there is actually
there's
rape,
one
is it
scene
isn't it?
in the Fountainhead particularly. I think it's Dominique Francon. I think that's her name.
Yeah.
Is just straight up raped by whatever the name of the really good architect is. But
Rourke.
in the process of basically
Howard
just being
Rourke.
raped, she learns that she's actually really liking it, and. I think this is where a lot of the accusations of misogyny against Ayn Rand come from. I don't think
she's not
she was being
misogynistic.
misogynistic. I think
That's
Ayn
bullshit.
Rand was just really turned on by the idea of being forcibly fucked by a powerful.
I think she
Egyptian
also
man.
like. I don't know what feminism was like in the US back in the 50s, honestly, but I think she was fighting against like sexual repression. Just saying like sex is good. Sex is a good part of life.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing about Ayn Rand's writing, and another reason why the embrace of her by, for example, the Reagan administration is in some ways understandable, because she said plenty of things that they do like, but she also said plenty of things that they definitely wouldn't have liked. So, for example, her antipathy towards Christianity, and she was very pro-sex. Basically, if the sex is good, then you can cheat on people, whatever. Have lots and lots of sex with lots of different people.
Yeah, she was polyamorous.
If it is you experiencing joy in the world.
She was polyamorous, and some of the men that she slept with had wives, and I think she was completely unapologetic about it.
Yeah, her life got pretty weird where she basically had these groups of, like, a circle of objectivist acolytes that she just moved through fucking one after the other.
She's just a wrecking ball.
She basically started an objectivist sex cult.
That's so funny. Yeah, maybe she was like one of few women who've like started something akin to a sex cult. That's really funny.
Yeah, so good on her for that.
She didn't give a fuck, man. She sent land of the
she
free,
really
motherfuckers.
did not.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
And
I guess this is just my bias. Looking at pictures of her, it looks like she'd smell like cigarettes.
oh,
and I don't
fucking
find that a
oath.
turn on,
Yeah,
but
no
apparently
shit.
other people did.
I bet you
She looks like she smelled like an ashtray.
I mean, those people back then were just smoking all the time. That was probably back in the era when like doctors would recommend smokes, right?
Yeah, smoke
The good old
cigarettes will
days.
make you healthy. And everyone in this book is just constantly smoking darts.
So one of the things that I really
In fact, a cigarette brand is a major plot point.
yeah, the dollar sign and a cigarette.
She loved forcible sex and cigarettes. I think those are probably the two guiding lights of her life.
So maybe I would say like, okay, so going into the book, I mean not going into the book, but like throughout the first part of the book in particular. Well, I think maybe setting up Francisco and Dagny and Reardon in particular. They're into like metallurgy and engineering and that sort of stuff. I really like that because I really like engineering and shit. And I like like she was basically just like jacking Levi off. Like, yeah, fucking engineering, yeah, fucking buildings, trains and shit.
There was one part in particular.
I was
I
just
think
like,
the best
thumbs
scene of
up,
the
Ayn.
book is the first run. The first run of the train on the John Galt line is, I think, the best part of the book, because that's where it's exciting. They're talking
Yeah.
about how fast the train's going, and when they go over the Reardon Metal Bridge, which is this new design that can only be built with Reardon metal, she makes a comment about how the only thing that's keeping these tons and tons and tons of locomotive afloat above this valley are human ideas put into the world. And when I read that, I thought, yeah, that's really fucking cool.
I like that Reardon and Dagny got on the train, not just as a plot point, but so leading up to the first run, all their detractors were saying like, oh, this council of like the National Council of Metallurgy or whatever, or the National Council of, I don't know, like trains or something, denouncing this, it's dangerous and or whatever. And they were like to Reardon or Dagny, hey, how do you know it's going to work? Like, how are you going to prove, or how are you going to assure people that it's safe? And I think Reardon said in response to a question to that effect, just said, "Well, I'm going to be on it myself." And he got on himself. And
that was pretty cool.
And it goes back to that old engineering, like the idea of skin in the game. You know, like if you're making a decision, then you should have, you should bear the consequences of that decision. So not making decisions that where like you can't, where you can like get out of accountability. And the old engineers from like, was it like Rome and Babylon and stuff, like builders, architects, bridge builders, they were expected to like be there at the opening of the structure. So like, you know, like the Roman bridge builder would have to stand under the bridge or something with his family for like, or like live under the bridge for a week, some shit like that, so that it put their skin in the game. So if you fuck up, like you're gonna die. And I think Hammurabi, or maybe it was Hammurabi or somebody else had this thing. It's like, if you build a house and then the house collapses and kills the son of the owner of the house, then the son of the builder will also be killed. You know, those sorts of things. So I think that like what she's getting at is important. I mean, it's kind of funny the way that she characterizes everything.
Yeah.
Is basically everybody in the state and the government, or people who are lackeys of the state, like James Taggart, are basically doing everything they can to get out of accountability and like parasitize all the objectivist characters. And then all the objectivist characters basically like put their money where their mouth is, do the shit, are super awesome, basically superheroes, and then just like get these 6 scenes where they're like going over a bridge or whatever, 100 miles an hour for the first time, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, and as much as I complain about Ayn Rand's writing, the scene where they are on the train going over the bridge was cool. That was a lot of fun.
And I think you've also got to give a...
I would also say the scene you brought up where you said Hank Reardon says, "Oh, I believe it'll be safe because I'm going to be on that train." That was a press conference, and that was a really funny scene because all of the journalists there had been constantly talking down Hank Reardon and Dagny Taggart. I think one of them, I think it was Bertram Scudder, who is ugly, had a radio panel, and it was a debate on something like, is Reardon metal an evil threat to public safety, or something like that. It's something just so comically weighted against Reardon metal. And then Dagny and Hank Reardon go to this press conference where they're going to talk about the first run of this train, and Dagny only talks about the engineering side. It just gives a bunch of dry engineering schematics in response to all questions. And then Hank Reardon stands up and starts talking about how much money he's going to make and how he's looking forward to just charging as much as he can for Reardon metal. I thought that was so funny.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So her characterization of basically the people, or not just the people, the characters, but the classes of people, or the groups of people that she doesn't like. So she doesn't like journalists, the journalistic class. She doesn't like the state itself. And she doesn't like, I guess, crony capitalists, I suppose, who are sort of in bed with the state. And she doesn't like as far as I can tell, basically like academics, but not necessarily like the intelligentsia per se, but the ones that are just like professors and just...
I think a good way to put it in modern terms is you think about there is a sharp demarcation between academics who come up with new ideas and academics who look for things to describe as problematic and leave it as there. And I think the latter class are the people that she really doesn't like.
And
I don't either.
And then also like people in like who hang off like the productive people, like, you know, the scabby family members. So, and I also don't think she likes unions very much.
Oh, fuck no, she really does not like unions.
I think
there are so many really funny descriptions of union people. Basically, all people in unions in this book are these like hulking muscly, mute
Thugs.
men who just smash things, shoot people, set things on fire.
But she doesn't
just
like
animals.
she doesn't like unions, but she does like workers. I think you could make a strong case that she likes workers.
Oh, she likes workers a
She
lot.
likes workers. She doesn't like unions.
And I think that's where the character of Eddie Willers will be really good to discuss, because he's the sort of person who's not an objectivist superhero, because he's not smart enough to do the things that Dagny, for example, can do. But he is rational. And so she has a deeply hierarchical view of the world where people like Eddie Willers exist to be led by people like Dagny and Hank Rearden. And they can be very useful to those people. But ultimately, they need those objectivist heroes, whereas the objectivist heroes don't actually need people like Eddie Willers.
Yeah. There's actually a line where she's arguing with the unions who are trying to say, like, we're not going to let our workers work for you, and she's saying, like, fine, sign a contract saying that, you know, none of our union workers will work for you. And she sort of challenges them to, like, she says, like, basically, I'm able to man a train. I can run the train myself, but your union, your workers can't run a train track. And so she's saying, like, I don't need them. They'll come and work for me because they want to. Yeah. Superhero, basically.
I think what she's saying there is in large part a response to Marxism. So later in the book, she describes two types of, she calls them mystics. These people who are anti-rational, anti-objectivist. And you have mystics of, I think, of the spirit, and that's basically Christians or religious people, and mystics of muscle, who are Marxists.
Mystics of muscle.
And in the part that you described, where Dagny Taggart is telling the union members or the union leaders, look, I can run a train myself, which is what your men can do, but I can also design, say, a train line and make it run, and your men can't do that. And I felt like this was a direct, very intentionally and pointedly contradicting what Marx and Engels said, where they believed that the origin of value is in manual labour. And what Ayn Rand is saying through self-insert Dagny Taggart is that no, ultimately actually value comes from people thinking and creating new ideas and then putting them into the world. And yes, it's useful to have people who can physically labour to instantiate those ideas, but it's much harder and ultimately more important for someone to have those ideas first.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you've nailed it. That's exactly what's going on. And there is this, I think it's probably a false dichotomy, but, you know, like Das Kapital.
That was exactly what I wanted to say. Yeah,
Das Kapital,
You're right.
Das Labor. Like, does the capital need the labor, or does labor need the capital more? Like, who's more important? And it's like, she's coming from Soviet Russia, and Marxism is very explicitly like, the capitalists can't do anything without labor. Ultimately, through the law of imputation, like, you sort of recursively go back from every single product in the economy. Eventually, it gets to either a raw material or some labor. So therefore, everything is a product of labor. Therefore, the capitalists are like basically taking, parasitizing labor and taking the excess value off their labor and, stealing from them through profits. So she's like that. Those sorts of lines, she's directly attacking. I suppose the labor, the labor side of that debate.
The labour theory of value.
Labor theory of value, but particularly the Marxist theory of value.
Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense given that she grew up in Stalinist Russia, which pretty fucking bad.
Yeah, pretty
Stalinist
fucking bad.
Moscow.
Pretty bad. Yeah, she's in Moscow, I think.
Yeah, so a lot of her deep antipathy to this form of thinking makes sense. But just because someone's reasons for believing something are understandable doesn't make those ideas Correct. And I agree with you completely where it's a false dichotomy. Actually, you need both. You need someone to have these ideas, and then you need manual labourers to instantiate them. And it is true what she says that, okay, speaking as Dagny, I am also capable of driving the train, but I can also have these ideas, whereas your union members can only drive the train but can't have those ideas. That's true, but in terms of dividing up your time, if someone who's capable of having great ideas is spending all of their time also physically instantiating the ideas, then their productive capacity is just so diminished.
Yeah, and I guess this is not it ends up, as we sort of mentioned earlier, like, it's not really labour necessarily versus Dagny. It's the unions versus Dagny, because she ended up getting a bunch of volunteers who she didn't pay them. I think I'm pretty sure they were volunteers. Come and man.
They all put their hands up because they wanted
to help her. And then there were also a bunch of people who volunteered to guard the train line without being asked. So
not even volunteered to guard the train line. It's Dagny's in the locomotive looking around. She just notices all of these people from Taggart Transcontinental who have shown up with guns to guard the train line to make sure nothing happens.
Which, just as a historical note,
she didn't even ask
it's really
them.
Interesting that actually during early industrialization, throughout probably like the 20th century, unions did do a lot of that sort of shit. Like, they did destroy factories and stuff, and hold those sorts of like capital investments hostage. So I think I don't know enough about the American context she's writing in, except I can imagine that there's probably a background of like those sorts of events happening, that she's sort of like, no, people, like, the laborers will defend the capital if they believe in what's happening. It's not like the capitalists just have to hire armed guards to suppress the workers. I think that's what she's trying to say. Like, the people are showing up and supporting the train because they believe in something.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's this distinction between intelligence and rationality that I think is a really good way of examining most things that happen in this book. So for Ayn Rand, rationality, this ability to recognize the objective world and then to act accordingly, is the most important thing. You need to be rational. It's really good to be intelligent, but it's not the same as being rational. And so in this case, the manual labourers she would probably regard as not particularly intelligent, but they're rational.
Yeah.
So they see that in this new train line, there is something really special and they want to be part of it. And even though they couldn't build it themselves, they want to protect it. Yeah, the rational intelligent axis I felt was quite a useful way for me to view the different characters in this book. So for example, Eddie Willers, moderately intelligent, very rational. Dagny Taggart, just fucking optimized in every way. Very, very intelligent, very rational. Dr. Stadler, whom... actually, no, he would have come up already. Yeah. So he's a brilliant physicist, so highly intelligent, and was one of the two important teachers at Patrick Henry University of three very important students. So Francisco D. Anconia, whom we've already mentioned, Ragnar Danisgold, who was, when I heard this character first brought up, I actually just started laughing.
So funny.
Who is an objectivist pirate.
I fucking love
who's
that.
Sailing around the high seas with his pirate boys, attacking government vessels,
or like
and
shipping
sinking their
Danconia's,
ill-gotten gains.
sinking at Danconia's copper, like ships carrying copper and stuff like that.
Yeah. Or when the government finally forces Hank Rearden to sign over the formula of Rearden metal, Ragnar is sailing around with Bronze Age pervert at the helm, sinking all of the boats carrying Rearden metal so no one can benefit from the theft of Rearden metal.
Really, like, Ragnar was BAP.
Ragnar... I imagine Bronze Age mindset was basically just written with Ragnar in mind.
Like, if we actually map
Ragnar
previous
is also
characters,
just ethereally beautiful.
Ethereal.
Ayn Rand makes sure to say on several occasions that Ragnar is just stunningly good looking, unbelievably handsome.
I think we could map a number of the authors from previous Book Club from Hell episodes onto characters. So Bap would be Ragnar.
I think that Solanus would be
Oh,
Dagny.
and because Ragnar wanted to be a philosopher as well.
Yeah.
So he's even more bad.
I think Solanus is Dagny. She's a groovy, hardcore, man stabbing bitch.
No, but Dagny loves getting roughly fucked by men,
so she's
which
Ilona
Solanus
Selkie.
definitely did not
She's
like.
Selkie.
She's a fusion of Ilona and
Yeah. So should we maybe get back to the plot?
Oh, actually, I just wanted to say, like, the third, at this point in the book at least, Robert Stadler, this state science, who's now running the State Science Institute, super intelligent, but irrational. Because he does not want to deal with other people. He feels it's okay to lie to the public to make them do things, which you shouldn't do, because that's preventing the public from being rational, because it's hiding objective reality from them. And he just gets walked all over by his unpleasant colleagues. And as the book goes on, he becomes more and more hostile to rational, objectivist people, and becomes one of the villains.
Yeah, he's the coward villain. He's one of the coward villains.
Yeah. So he's an example of what happens if you're intelligent but irrational. And it ends up badly. So ultimately what makes you good is your rationality, not your intelligence. And also, so he mentions that he had these 3 students that he loved and he just thought were going to be world changers. One was Ragnar, one was Francisco de Anconia, and then there's a third one, and he doesn't say his name, and he says he must be dead, because if he was still alive, he would have changed the world by now. And keep that in mind, dear listeners. It's very important.
Yeah, so the end of part 1 ends with Dagny basically going on a wild goose chase for looking for the person who built this amazing engine that her and Reardon found. And she literally goes like all over the fucking like United States, like chasing leads.
Yeah, all over America.
Looking, and it sort of ends with her like with a big question mark. It's very good. And along the way,
with a big dollar sign
and a big dollar sign. Yeah, that's right. Actually, in particular, she meets a philosopher, an important philosopher, who is now a chef, a very good chef, but he refuses to do philosophy anymore.
The food is incredible.
He's incredible, and he's one of the objectivist characters. But he's resigned, so he stopped doing philosophy. He left philosophy. He said he's one of those, one of the many people over the last 5 or 10 years that have exited society or exited their labor from the society, and he refuses to do philosophy anymore. And yeah.
What's even more interesting than that, because she just finds this diner in the middle of nowhere and goes in and notices that the cook is very good looking. And makes sure to mention
really
that
good looking.
He's remarkably handsome. And that the food is really good, and that he's working so expertly on the grill. Turns out it's Hugh Axton. So when I said that Dr. Robert Stadler, who was then a teacher at Patrick Henry University, he and another teacher had these 3 incredible students. This other teacher was Hugh Axton. And the handsome cook in this diner in the middle of nowhere is Hugh Axton, who's stepped back from the world. And it is interesting, when he's talking to Dagny, it's more superhero dialogue, because he's a bit evasive as to why he's stepped back from the world. But I think he gives her a cigarette to smoke, and she does, because she loves smoking. And it's got a gold dollar sign on it, and she just doesn't know that she doesn't know this brand of cigarettes. And because she is a tobacco hound, that's unusual that she doesn't know the brand of cigarette that she's smoking.
I want a cigarette. And
this
with
dollar
a dollar sign
sign
on it now.
will become important.
That's so good.
Yeah. Yeah, cigarette is a major plot point. And so in addition, and she asks Hugh Axton about this motor, and he says, you will never find the person who created this motor, not until he wants to find you.
Dup, dup, duh.
Yep. In terms of part one, the only other thing probably worth mentioning is it's it's called like Directive 10209, which is put in place by this band of Washington boys because they say, oh, the country's getting worse and worse and worse. So the country 5 years ago was economically in a much better place than it is now. So what we've got to do is just freeze everything in place so it stops getting worse. And Directive 10209 does that by basically making it illegal for anyone to leave their job, make it illegal for anyone to get a new job, make it illegal for firms to move, like to shift location, makes it illegal for people to own more than one company. So it basically just says, okay, the economy as it is now, you're not allowed to change anything.
The statically rotating economy.
It's really funny.
Economy.
Yeah. The Directive 10209 I also found really, really funny. Look, I'll give her the benefit of the doubt and assume that she was being intentionally amusing. Like, it's just such a funny idea. It's okay, we'll just freeze everything in place.
I think what I would say about these aspects, whether even the heroes, how it's, what's the word? It's hyperreal. It's hyperrealism. It's like she's turned everything up to 11.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, she knows obviously that her characters are unrealistic, but that's not the point. She's like trying to make them into like archetypes. And even with things that are happening in society, it's like every now and then America has some dumb fucking regulation that, you know, like the US Patriot Act. You're just like, that is such an Orwellian name to give that fucking piece of legislation. But, you know, so she's playing on that, like, the act says one thing, but it's actually doing another. And I imagine that is very heavily informed by what she saw in Soviet Russia. So she's turning up the hyper realism on everything, sure. And it's at times it's funny, at times it's a bit overbearing, and at times it's is it satirical or is it funny because we just find it funny? Was she trying to be funny? I found it hard to tell.
Well, in terms of satire, it depends on how you define satire. So I don't think this is a humorous satire, but it's satire in that she's taken elements of the world around her and then place them into a story where we can examine their contradictions and the ridiculous aspects of them.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, an important thing closing. I think this actually does close part one. So Ellis Wyatt, the fracking superhero, told Dagny and Hank Reardon that if the government pushes him too hard and if the government makes it impossible for him to operate, he's going to try to bring down as many people with him as he can. And when Regulation 10209 is passed, what it does, among other things, is it just basically kills Ellis Wyatt's business. And it's going to make it impossible for him to keep operating. So what he does is he just blows up his entire oil fields in Colorado. And it's something like there's a scene where Dagny's trying to reach him really quickly to stop him from doing something crazy. And she finds the oil fields on fire and she finds a note there somehow that says something. It's from Wyatt and it says something like, "I've left them as I found them. They're all yours." Which is just reinforcing this point that Ellis Wyatt was capable of having these ideas to make this plot of land productive of oil. And without those ideas, no one else can do it. So he says basically, like, I've left it as I've found it, unusable without my ideas. Try your best to use them now. And this huge inferno will be a symbol throughout the book. People come to call it Wyatt's torch because no one can put it out. And the government tries the Wyatt Reclamation Project to basically put out the fires in the oil fields, but they just can't do it. Without Ellis Wyatt, it's not happening. And that's how the first part ends, with Wyatt having set all his oil fields on fire and then disappeared himself. Vanishes without a trace. I did find that pretty cool, actually. So part two, I'm not sure how long the gap is between the end of part 1 and the beginning of part 2, but at the beginning of part 2, energy shortages are already starting to bite because now Wyatt's gone and there's just not nearly as much oil floating around. So people are already having to go without heating and stuff like that. And that's something I think Ayn Rand does well, is the gradual decay of society in Atlas Shrugged. So when the book starts, things aren't great, but people's lives are relatively untouched. They're not too bad. Whereas by the end of the book, America is just falling to pieces. States are seceding. There are civil wars within these states which have seceded from the rest of the United States. It's just complete chaos. People going around in horse-drawn carts. That is an element of the book that I did enjoy.
I think that she did a really good job of you could interpret this as a warning to America about basically.
I don't even like it. I mean, yeah, you can interpret it that way. I think it's pretty explicitly a warning.
Yeah. Well, because the other interpretation is you could interpret it as a description of what was and has been happening. I mean, like, what do they call it? Like the road to serfdom. So she was friends with von Mises, and von Mises was just like had no tolerance for any like social policy at all. It's just like, no, we need, like, that is a slippery, like, it'll just like ratchet towards, it starts here, it starts at, at time t, it starts with a little bit of socialist policy, and then at time t plus n, it'll just be like become full-blown socialism. And von Mises, notoriously pig-headed, like stubborn. And obviously Ayn Rand, notoriously stubborn as well. So I imagine they just like amped each other up. and so what she's
probably had
yeah, maybe I probably don't interpret von Mises as having a sexuality. It's like angry old man, but yes, perhaps perhaps she
Ayn Rand put the
yeah, so she might have also been describing like this is a warning of, and it's a description, it's a warning of what will happen if America keeps on going down this route.
Yeah.
And yeah.
In many ways too, it's sort of the reductio ad absurdum of I'm sure how she viewed government attempts to legislate on social policy. He said, okay, let's push this to the extreme. So all of the bad characters just keep talking about how I'm only interested in the public good. I'm not interested in profit. I think at one point, Oren Boyle that made a really funny comment where he just shrieks at someone. It's like, no one can accuse me of running a profit-making business. No one! It is just such a good line.
Yeah, so good.
And he meant it as a good thing. It's, look how virtuous I am. My company has never made a profit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't be accused of making profits.
Yeah, so there's this pretense.
And again, I assumed that she was trying to be funny there. She really succeeded. That was very funny.
Like all of the irrational.
Yeah, she takes these and then just pushes it to an absurd place so that I think she felt that we could see the folly of social legislation.
Yeah, and in particular, there is a theme that goes throughout the entire book, which is that the virtuous characters are living for themselves. They're doing things. I want to make a profit, or I want to make this train because it's amazing, it's awesome. I want to save my company because my legacy or whatever. Whereas all of the like villains are always apparently motivated by selflessness. So doing things for other people. The classic example being like.
Well, they tell everyone that that's what they're doing very, very performatively.
Yeah, whereas obviously they're also like enriching themselves or whatever, And the classic example of that being like the Friends of the Planet or whatever it was, organization.
The Friends of Global Progress, you mean?
Yeah.
It's just such a good name. This is the thing with Ayn Rand. Or with many of the books we discuss, actually. once you've read this brick of a book, it's quite funny to talk about in hindsight. It's just like this. It should be 400 pages long. If it were 500 pages, I could recommend it pretty comfortably to people. Because there are so many really, genuinely very amusing things in the book.
Yeah, I didn't have to like it. Yeah, it is very long. Like, strap yourself in if you're gonna read it. But yeah, I didn't mind that. I found it forgivable. I probably if I were gonna edit it, I probably wouldn't cut it a huge amount. Like I reckon, yeah. Personally,
For me, there's
that's
so much in this book that's so repetitive. So, for example, every time there's a scene of an objectivist and a non-objectivist disagreeing with each other, just one of those will be quite funny, except she has so many of them that go on for so long, and they all say more or less the same thing. There's so much redundancy in here.
Yeah.
And these sort of things, they don't drive the plot forward. They don't tell us anything more about the world. They're not really serving any purpose other than letting us know that this particular character is good, this particular character is bad, but we know that.
Yeah, we know that just from the physical description of the
character. I guess. Yeah, from the physiognomy of the characters, we already know that. And like I said, just one of these characters, if these scenes were used much more sparingly, I would enjoy them because they're quite funny, but yeah, they really don't need to be there. So in part, it's an aesthetic problem I have with it, which is subjective. Ayn Rand would say it's objective.
Maybe. There's probably aspects of it that are like objective, intersubjective, subjective. Yeah. Probably these days, I imagine if there was somebody doing something similar, it would not, like, they wouldn't end up writing 1,200 pages.
I think it's a bit of a meme when people say, oh, people don't read anymore, they only want short books. Because, for example, look at George R.R. Martin's books, are really popular. Those are gigantic. I don't think it's right, actually, that people don't read long books anymore.
No, people read lots of long books.
I think that's mostly coped by authors who can't self-edit stuff down.
No, I meant like for writing like the same book. I think like...
For writing the same book, I think irrespective of when it's written, it would just be vastly improved if it were half the length or even shorter.
So should we keep on going the plot?
Yeah, let's keep going through. So we get the first mention of Project X, Project Xylophone, which is a secret project at the State Sciences Institute that Dr. Ferris, one of the underlings at the State Sciences Institute, knows about and is running, but Dr. Stadler doesn't know about. And Dr. Ferris will become a more and more important figure in the plot. He's fairly intelligent, but very irrational. And he writes this book called Why Do You Think You Think? Which basically just talks about how truth doesn't exist and any feeling that a human being might have as to whether something is true or not is just a figment of their imagination. And it basically just says everything that is the antithesis of objectivism.
And Stadler is like the state scientist.
Yeah. Both of them are working for the State Science Institute. It's just at this point, Stadler is still somewhat redeemable. He's not very rational, but he's rational enough to dislike a lot of the stuff that Dr. Ferris is doing. But Dr. Ferris is just irredeemably irrational. He's just a bad person.
And for context, they're using Stadler's reputation with the public, like good reputation, as leverage for basic like their authoritarian or their corruption, like doing stuff and sort of like not necessarily running by like public announcements of the Science Institute. They're not actually running it past Stadler.
And this is I quite liked this part because it did talk about a problem I see in science where Stadler doesn't. Dr. Ferris doesn't really believe what he wrote in his book, Why Do You Think You Think? He wrote it because he said it will make the public feel better about not being able to think very well if they're told, oh, don't worry, no one can think, so it doesn't matter if you feel inferior. Everyone's bad. And he does this to get funding and to make the public feel better about science. And Dr. Stadler at this point is still rational enough where he says, no, misleading the public like that's bad. And Ayn Rand obviously thinks it's bad because you're preventing the public from being rational. You're hiding objective reality from them. And I do think this is an issue with a lot of not just scientists, but people who self-describe as experts in a field, where they feel that because non-experts in their field don't understand as much as they do, then those people must be stupid. And therefore you can lie to them if that lie makes them behave in a way that's for their own good.
Yeah,
it's this sort of technocratic authoritarianism. And I profoundly disagree with it because, well, from both a practical and an ethical perspective, I think just lying to people like that because you assume that you're right and they can't possibly be shows a profound lack of insight that maybe you're wrong too.
Yeah.
But also, practically, it almost never works. People tend to find out that you've been lying to them, and then you shred your credibility, and you shred the credibility of whatever, for example, scientific discipline you were apparently acting in the name of, and you end up just doing far more damage to science as a whole or as a pursuit than you would have otherwise if you were just truthful with people. So I felt that this section it's somewhat obnoxiously written, but she is talking about something that is important.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's the what's it called? The priesthood, the new priesthood, the secular priesthood of experts and scientists and professors, whatever.
And I think it's fine having people who know what they're talking about, or domain experts running things, or at least having a lot of power in a certain domain. Where I get off is where they start lying to people and misleading people intentionally because they say, oh, well, we know so much and you know so little that you will just behave irrationally if you knew the truth. So we need to lie to you to make sure you behave in your own interest. And oftentimes the people saying that are also getting things wrong, but they're so pig-headed that they don't acknowledge it.
Yeah.
So what else? So Dagny's still looking around for the person who built this motor, and she's decided that she's going to try to reverse engineer it. She gets Dr. Stadler to come and have a look at the engine, which she's storing in Taggart Transcontinental Terminal in New York, underground. And he recommends Quentin Daniels to help reconstruct the motor. He says, okay, this is one of the few good... I forget if Daniels is a physicist or an engineer, but he's something like that. He's good with motors, and he's recommended by Dr. Stadler. And I thought this was a very good piece of symbolism. So Quentin Daniels is working at the Utah Institute of Technology as a night watchman, which is the only good function of a state in Ayn Rand land. I bet she was referencing John Stuart Mill when she talked about how Quentin Daniels is the night watchman. So like the Utah Institute of Technology has shut down because of lack of funding, but Quentin Daniels put his hand up to stay there as the night watchman. And while he's fulfilling his role as the night watchman, he's in the lab at the Utah Institute of Technology doing experiments for his own gratification. But anyway, he starts working on trying to reverse engineer this motor. And we'll just leave Quentin Daniels to the side for the moment, but he will become very important in Dagny's story at some point later on in the book. In terms of big plot points, there are a lot of less important points that are quite funny. For example, James Taggart gets married to a girl named Cheryl, who's from a poor background, and he uses her as this prop, basically to show everyone how big-hearted and democratic he is, that someone as wealthy as him would marry a poor girl. And he just basically trots her out at parties and things to show everyone up, everyone,
kind of like constantly,
and to demonstrate how good he is.
Like cuts her down, or like not cuts her down, but like like she'll say something positive about him or Dagny or whatever, and he'll just like twist it.
Yeah, James Taggart is pretty dislikable. I also think it's quite funny how Ayn Rand compares the sex life of James Taggart with that of Dagny. So James Taggart, on his first, I guess it's a sort of date with Cheryl, he doesn't sleep with her. And he tells himself it's because he's just too high-minded for sex. Whereas in fact, he actually just has no sex drive because he's not an objectivist. Whereas, and so I think this scene happens just after Dagny and Hank Rearden have sex for the first time, and they just go at it like absolute animals because they're both optimized objectivists. And so their sex life is intense. And this does get to a deeper point that Ayn Rand makes, where she seems to say that it is only someone who is rational, that is, someone who can engage with reality, who can truly experience joy. So joy, desire, love, these are things only open to people who are rational. And that's why James Taggart is just not interested in sex, because he's never experienced good sex. He's only experienced the physical activity of it. But anyway, it's James marries her, and eventually Cheryl, James's bride, kills herself because she's rational and she just can't stand James's irrationality. In terms of other things, so Dagny is still searching around for the company that made this cigarette that she got from Hugh Axton with the golden dollar sign on it, and it doesn't seem to be made anywhere. She can't find it. Ken Daniger, who's another titan of industry, he mines coal, disappears. And Dagny gets a bit more insight into why all of these titans of industry are disappearing. So Daniger and Rearden are taken to court for an illegal sale of Rearden metal. And shortly before the trial is to take place, Dagny just has this intuition that Ken Daniger is going to be the next titan of industry to disappear. So she goes to meet him. She organises a meeting with him, and she gets there, and he's already in a meeting. And he stays in the meeting for ages, and he's late for the meeting with Dagny, which is highly uncharacteristic for him. And she's getting really nervous, and eventually he invites her into his office, and she goes in, and he looks relaxed for the first time ever. And he tells Dagny, I'm going to disappear tomorrow. And Dagny realises that whoever was talking to Ken Daniger must be the person who's been convincing all of these other titans of industry to disappear. The Destroyer. She calls him the Destroyer in her head. So this is a pretty important plot point because now we understand that there's some sort of logic behind the people who are disappearing. Obviously, the people who are disappearing were competent people, but now we see that there must be someone or a group of people orchestrating this.
There's a conspiracy afoot.
And Dagny feels that it's this massive conspiracy to undercut all competent people in America. And she hates this Destroyer and wants to kill him.
Yeah, and then does she is this the part where she chases? Is this the part where she chases him? I think we're getting up to the good part.
I should also say, actually, because this is important, so Eddie Willers, Dagny Taggart's Beat a Bitch Boy, regularly goes and has lunch in the Taggart Terminal cafeteria with this unnamed worker, some sort of manual labourer. Eddie doesn't even know this person's name, but he really likes talking to him. He just feels that he understands, and Eddie tends to just pour out his soul to this guy. And this person will ask the odd question, mostly about Dagny and what she's doing, but we'll leave that to the side for now. In terms of big plot points, as you said earlier, an important thing is that Dagny tries to get in touch with Quentin Daniels, And I think she's having a hard time getting onto him. And she starts worrying that he's going to be taken away by the destroyer too. So she makes this journey to get to Quentin Daniels. And it's something like when she reaches him, she sees him getting into this plane and taking off. And so Dagny, because Dagny is an objectivist superhero, she also knows how to fly a plane. And she gets in a plane herself and starts GTA chasing this plane that took off with Quentin in it, starts flying after him. And this is a pretty good scene. I liked this scene, how Dagny's chasing after this plane. The fuel in her plane's getting lower and they're going out over the mountains in Colorado. And she just doesn't know where this other plane is flying because there's no landing strip for ages. And this other plane starts flying lower and lower. And Dagny doesn't know where it's going because she thinks it's got to crash. Why is it flying that low? And then it disappears. And Dagny just keeps following it.
Just goes. I thought this was one of the better scenes.
And she follows it into this strange... Yeah, this is a good scene. There's this strange kind of silvery looking shiny... It almost looks like cloud cover nestled between mountain peaks. And Dagny flies into it and then just suddenly the power cuts from the plane and she goes... She's going to crash. And she smashes down and she thinks she's definitely dead. And then she wakes up in paradise. This part of the book was good. I liked this part.
This is libertarian techno-objectivist paradise.
Intriguing because Ayn Rand in this part forgot to put in any monologues to kill the pacing, so the pacing was still intact. And I wanted to see what would happen. But this part was good. This is good. Dagny wakes up and she crashed into a field and she's surprised that she's still alive. And she's picked up and saved by none other than the destroyer himself, John Galt. And this is the part of the book where I actually started feeling more annoyed with Ayn Rand because up till now, it felt like a pretty funny satire that was marred by the execution. She went on for too long with explaining her philosophy or getting people to give lectures on her philosophy. It was overwritten, but I didn't feel like she was spoiling anything special. But with the introduction of Galt's Gulch, I got more annoyed because I thought this concept is so strong, and she's really fumbling the execution. So paradoxically, because this part made the book even more interesting, it made me even more irritated. How about you tell us what Galt's Gulch is? This is just like, this concept is so fucking good. It's just so funny.
Yeah, so it is literally just a libertarian capitalist objectivist paradise. It's just all the most... It's basically like Miami, Florida, if DeSantis just becomes like supreme dictator.
It's DeSantis land.
It's just they're all just a bunch of capitalists fucking making their motors and making their metals and shit. Fucking giant dollar sign made out of gold. Like
oh fuck, that's right. Yeah, the giant dollar sign statue hanging in the air
freely, like yeah, and it's all the industrialists and the there's this one guy who's a great concert composer who's there, and he's written his like unpublished his unpublished Fifth Symphony or whatever is playing, and she's just like, oh my god, this is the best place in the world. Yeah, and it's hidden by like this by this force field. Not a force field, like a man-made mirage that like protects it from being seen from the air. And yeah.
yeah, it makes it look like there's this cloud covering the valley. It's just like this valley in the mountains of Colorado that's hidden, completely hidden, and this is where all of the industrialists who've been disappearing have gone. So it's like you said, it's like Friedrich Hayek's wet dream. It's this beautiful valley full of producers. full of people who make stuff. And I remember reading this and just thinking of you, thinking, man, Levi's going to fucking love this because Midas Mulligan runs the bank and he only accepts gold. He doesn't accept paper money.
Midas Mulligan. Pure bold gold.
Midas
None of that
Mulligan.
fiat shit.
And there is this bit where she starts talking about the gold standard.
Fucking love that, man. It's so fucking good.
I was thinking of you when I was reading it. I just thought, no, this is like if Levi weren't sold on this book already, this is where it seals the deal.
Look, like it literally only took like a chapter for me to be like, yeah, I'm down.
Well, this chapter was the coup de grace then. Of like, it is cementing itself as Levi's book when they're talking about sound money, when she's in libertarian paradise, talking about sound money.
Yeah, it's fucking great.
But yeah, I felt more annoyed that she, at least to my mind, stuffed up the execution of this book when I got to Galt's Gulch, because the idea of, we'll get to John Galt as well, but of this guy going around convincing all the most productive members of society to disappear into like libertarian wonderland in the Rockies, or I assume it's in the Rockies. Yeah. And just trading with each other in gold is while the rest of America falls apart is just so good. That is just an S tier concept that's so good. It's so funny.
Yeah, I fucking love that shit.
The ridiculousness of it, but then also, yeah, there's a lot to love about the concept of Galt's Gulch.
Like it's no, it's pretty funny. But yeah, I do fucking love it. Fan-fucking-tastic.
It's also really funny. So the you'd got a lot of superhero conversations before, but the superhero conversations here, where it's like Dagny Taggart and then all of these other titans of industry having dinner together, were just next level, where they're talking about how good it is to produce and how they don't like parasites and how gold's really good and how they only trade with each other's mind. Transactions between equal parties. Yeah. I didn't know that she knew von Mises, but man, if he read this part, he would have fucking loved it,
man. Yeah, that was really funny.
So the character of John Galt or Galt?
I think it's Galt.
I don't know how to pronounce it. I think I've said it both ways.
In my head, I was saying John Galt, but maybe that's wrong.
Galt's Gulch. Yeah, that Galt's sounds Gulch. Better. So yeah. the place is Galt's named. Gulch. So I think Midas Mulligan owns the land, and everyone except John Galt calls it Galt's Gulch. Which, yeah, I guess Galt's Gulch. Yeah, that works better. I think you're right, because it kind of...
Galt's Gulch.
Yeah, that sounds snappier.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure she's aiming for alliteration or something to that effect. Galt's Gulch.
Yeah, I think you're right. But he's a really important character. So he is the third star student, the unnamed, up until now, star student.
The unnamed star student.
Of Hugh Axton and Robert Stadler. And he's the one that Stadler said must be dead, because if he was still alive, he'd be changing the world. And that is exactly what he's been doing.
But from his little fucking libertarian paradise, he's been changing it by convincing all of the like Elon Musk types to stop working.
Yeah, because what he got this idea of, well, manual labourers go on strike, but what if men of the mind went on strike? So what if all of the Elon Musks and Mark Zuckerbergs in the world took their brilliant minds and went on strike? What if they disappeared to libertarian paradise and left us all to our own devices? What would happen? And this whole place is powered by this motor, which draws static energy from the atmosphere and makes it into kinetic energy, I guess.
Or something.
Galt was the inventor of the magic motor Galt is the destroyer. Galt is the one convincing all of the men of great capacity to go on strike. He's behind everything.
Yeah, he essentially invented a perpetual motion machine.
And even better, and this is just where we see more of Ayn Rand's sexual fetishes. It's like Dagny gets there. She gets healed up by a really good surgeon who left the outside world because it just wasn't rational enough. So naturally, she gets A+ medical care.
It was from what was that guy's name? There was this biotechnology executive a few years ago who everybody was hating on. Who's just like hyper capitalist, like jacked up the price of like his medication to like $100,000 a pill or some shit.
Are you talking about Martin Shkreli or something?
Yeah, Shkreli. It's like Shkreli would be there.
that guy wasn't a biotechnologist. He was a financier. Yeah. So he didn't create the drug. He didn't create
shit.
He just bought it and jacked up the price. I think he was a shithead.
But I still think Shkreli would be there.
No, I don't. But Shkreli didn't create stuff. He just bought the rights to something.
Yeah, true. Maybe
he's not a creator.
He's not a creator. He's not a fucking builder. Little bitch.
No.
But
this is the place where Elon Musk would be shooting his mouth off on Twitter from.
So there is one important thing about Galt's Gulch, which is there's like this pledge that they have to make. And the pledge is, I swear by my life and my love of it that I will never live for the sake of another man, nor ask another man to live for mine. So it's just like pure American individualist, like rugged individualism to the extreme. A bunch of gold bugs, like
exactly. You say it, and a bald eagle will land on your shoulder and shed a single tear. The pledge is really important because Dagny has to give it to stay there. I should also add, Dagny is just so optimized that she was going to be invited to Galt's Gulch eventually. She was definitely on the list, but it wasn't her time yet. But she fucking flew a plane into there because she's an absolute mad lad.
Yeah, the one person who can actually find Galt's
Gulch. The one
Gulch.
person who's ever done it.
Yeah.
So she's in this strange position of she hasn't given the pledge, but she's in the Gulch. So she's got a period of time where she'll stay there and weigh up her options as to whether she'll give the pledge and stay or return to the outside world. And she's conflicted because she's not ready yet to give up Taggart Transcontinental. And she's still really into Hank Rearden, who's still on the outside. However, John Galt has caught her eye. So she's living in John Galt's house, and because nothing is ever given for free in this place, she needs to pay him for room and board. And her idea is, I'll be his maid. And you can so naturally Galt is really good looking.
So fucking kinky.
And it's just so like Ayn Rand's sexual fantasies on sexual fantasies. It's like, I want to be a maid for a powerful objectivist man. I should also add, she really seemed to like having like sort of being the property of a really confident man being bossed around, because Hank Rearden would like tell her what to wear. He'd just booty call her in the middle of the night, show up in her apartment because he had the key, and use her body and then leave. And there are a few scenes of Dagny Taggart telling him, it's like, yeah, I just want to be used by you. I just want to be an object for you to fuck and then tell what to do and then leave. And it starts again with John Galt where she tells him, I'll be your maid and you can tell me what to do because it's your house and you are my employer. And naturally, she doesn't do it in Galt's Gulch. She does it when she returns to the outside, but she starts having sex with John Galt as well. Did I mention she had sex with Francisco D'Anconia too?
Yeah, there's 3 men that she.
If I hadn't, she did, and that's Francisco. Also important. It's like so many of the really the big dog objectivist men in the story.
The 3 most important male characters, like that aren't villains. So like obviously James Taggart's an important male character, but he's a villain. So like all 3 of the top
Yeah, he's a villain, and he's also her brother.
Yeah. Small detail. Yeah, so
that's some very, very clever characterization. So Ayn Rand took him off the table immediately, so we don't have to worry about her ever having sex with James Taggart. She takes James Taggart off the table by making it incest. She doesn't have sex with Ragnar though, so she didn't get the trifecta of the 3-star students.
Yeah,
I was half expecting her to sleep with Ragnar.
Oh fuck, man, the Pirate King. That would have been cool.
The Pirate King.
Ragnar, fucking
Punishing
Norwegian
Nordic
pirate.
cock. Look, I mean,
Fuck, she's funny.
there is, after the novel ends and everyone is happy in Galt's Gulch,
Yeah, it's the
maybe
epilogue.
that's when the objectivist orgies start.
The epilogue is just like I bet you there's some weird like sexual fan fiction out there somewhere that's like
Ayn Rand
Gold's
fanfic,
Gulch,
holy shit.
like they're all just fucking and they're all using like golden dildos and shit like that.
Yeah. But the Galt's Gulch stuff, I felt like went on for too long and it started to lose its impact. But
Yeah.
it is such a good idea. I really love this idea. So Dagny does decide to leave though. She doesn't give the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah, she wants to go toe to toe. She wants to beat John Galt. Like, I'm not fucking.
Yeah, it gets
I'm gonna beat
competitive.
you,
She's like,
motherfucker.
I'm not going to let him destroy my railroad. She's not ready to give up the railroad. And she wants to see Hank Rearden, but she starts wanting to see him less because she's getting more and more attracted to John Galt and keeps imagining having sex with him and stuff. And it's pretty funny too when she leaves the Gulch, she has to be blindfolded and flown out, so she can't tell anyone where it is, I guess, even though she already flew there. But she gets blindfolded by John Galt, and you can just tell again. Ayn Rand had someone do this to her. They tie me up, blindfold me, use me.
Fucking good on her.
I
man.
do find
She
it.
doesn't give a shit. She's like,
No,
yeah,
this
I'm
is
kinky.
so.
Give it to
I
me.
really enjoy it when authors of a book obviously have weird, not only sexual hang-ups, but just weird views of the world, weird ways of interacting with other people, and put it into their books. And this is one of the aspects that made me like Atlas Shrugged more. Is that
I think I just liked it because
Ayn Rand obviously really liked having sex and really liked being treated roughly, and
Yeah.
she just wrote it into the book everywhere.
and she just
So good on her.
she
I
didn't
really like
apologize.
that.
Not only did she not apologize, she's like, no, this is good.
No, she rammed it down your throat, and then
Not the
built
only
an
thing that she
ethical and
wants written down,
philosophical system around it to make it not only
She's
fun
just
but the right
justifying
thing
her
to do.
like her like sexual exploits. She's like, yeah, I like to
No,
fuck.
I like the confidence there. It's a very confident
Yeah, so much
move.
confidence.
So she goes back into the outside world, and I think she spent a month in Galt's Gulch.
Yeah, you have to spend a
And
month.
even just within that month, things have gotten so much worse in the outside world. Like, there are food shortages, energy shortages. No new cars are on the road. There was quite a nice scene, actually, where she described, and I think it was quite a bit earlier in the book, where people just can't afford cars anymore. So there are cars abandoned by the side of the road. They look like skeletons dying in the dirt. She meets with Hank Rearden, and he immediately knows that she's seeing someone else and is like, I'm okay with it, baby. Don't worry. This is also a lot of the Ayn Rand
Definitely, yeah. The polyamory stuff going
sexual wish fulfillment that basically Dagny Taggart is such a fuckboy.
Yeah, she's a fuckboy.
She just-
so funny.
She just sees a new man that she likes the look of and just swan dives into his pants. And then the men that she was sleeping with before, who are obsessed with her, remain obsessed with her and remain in love with her, but are all saying, I get it, Dagny. You met a better man. I'm not happy. I still love you. I loved all the times we shared together, but I get it. And you have my blessing. And then Francisco de Anconia, who also has had sex with Dagny and is still in love with her, finds out about Hank Rearden and is like, don't worry, baby, I get it. He's a great man. You know, you do you get on that steel magnate cock. And then finds out about John Galt and is also like, I get it, Dagny. He's a strong man. If I swung that way, I'd be lusting after him too. I get it. Don't worry about me, Dagny. You do you. And it's just, I found it quite funny and quite endearing that, because so much of this book is about taking responsibility and things like that, where Dagny Taggart's sexual exploits in this book, the reason why she can get away with them is basically because you have a succession of men who are uncharacteristically forgiving of someone just having sex with someone else, kicking them to the curb, and they, instead of being upset, say, yeah, I get it. This is the right thing for you to do. I think you should keep doing this. I support you and still love you. I will be your emotional handbag,
it's just like, well,
but I will place no emotional demands upon you.
You don't have to take responsibility for your actions if there's just no negative consequences for your actions, Jack. Don't you get that?
Yeah, and I found
everybody's just
in
rational.
The case of Dagny Taggart's love life, she's so untrustworthy. Just completely untrustworthy. He just basically cheats on every man she's been involved with. But all of them are so rational that they support it. It's like, yeah, let me cradle John Galt's balls while he thrusts deep inside you. Can I be on cleanup duty, baby? It's just, this part of the book I enjoyed more because it's just, it doesn't totally fly in the face of what she's saying. It's just, the situation is so unrealistic that I can't imagine it ever playing out that way.
Yeah.
In terms of important things happening in the world outside, though, how about actually Project X is revealed, Project Xylophone. It's basically like a WMD that uses sound.
Essentially like
you...
a fucking ray gun, essentially.
You basically just pick a point and it vaporizes it with sound.
Yeah.
And the government says that it's going to be there for public safety. And I also found this pretty funny.
I love that. Public safety is
given that, like, Ayn Rand wrote this before all the anti-terror legislation.
And before the modern era of bubble wrapping everything, the safety movement.
Yeah. But I found it very funny that the government has this WMD that it's going to use against enemies of public order for your own safety. I guess, yeah, a tiger doesn't change its stripes. I found that very amusing. It's something that only has become more amusing as time goes on.
Yeah, I mean, like, cops and shit these days are like military grade fucking shit. You know, like, even the cop, there's in Sydney, there's literally in New South Wales, there's literally like this part of the New South Wales like police called the Raptor Squad. And they're like,
oh, you tell me about these guys. Yeah, the Raptor
Squad. And they're just these, you know, like footy players, right? They're like 6 something, like 100+ kilos, just beefed up motherfuckers. Okay, imagine a bunch of those dudes, but like kitted out in like Kevlar vests and like batons and shit. You know, I saw this one news report where like the Raptor Squad got called on a fucking house party. You know, a house party.
The Raptor strikes.
And they just fucked up some of these kids at this house party. It's like, okay, sure, shut down the house party, I guess. I mean, fucking, it's a house party, get over it. But like, send like, you know, a couple of cars of normal cops and like tell them to shut the fuck up and like, not sending a fucking Raptor Squad. Like, what the fuck? You know?
Levi, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing properly.
And
I fully support this. I think the police should be more militarized. I fully support every police precinct in Melbourne having access to nuclear weapons.
I think we should only have Raptor Squads.
We should only have Raptor Squads.
Just rolling around in like armor-plated fucking SUVs and shit.
It's an interesting distinction between the Australian police and the Czech police, whereas I find the Australian police much of the time seem to go out of their way to appear slightly ridiculous, like wearing high-vis vests, riding around on bikes and things.
Horses
Whereas
in Melbourne.
Czech police are really fucking scary.
Yeah.
They're always very, very polite.
But they look scary.
It just seems like you're not allowed to join the Czech police force if you're under 6'3".
Jesus.
There are always these really intimidating, like, gigantic dudes walking around with assault rifles. In the airport, they wander around with assault rifles.
Yeah. Same in France.
On the street, they don't have rifles.
Yeah, and I couldn't imagine what...
Unless it's outside a big landmark like the castle, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, there's much more of an open intimidation factor to the police here.
The US cops also look very fucking militarized. Like, they've got weapons and equipment, so it's just like there's... Yeah, it's just domestic military.
That's why they need Project X. They need the... I was quite disappointed, though, with Project X as a plot device. So when it was introduced, I thought it would play a much larger role in the story. I thought, maybe they're going to use it to threaten Galt's Gulch.
Yeah, I thought that was... same.
Or
It's like maybe
that.
they're going to attack
When
Galt's
she
Gulch or
put this
something.
into place, I thought, okay, I see what she's doing. This is cool. This is going to build some really interesting tension if now the Gulch is under threat from the outside world. If
the libertarian
the rest of
paradise
America
is
can
being
get
attacked.
back at it. Yeah, I was
state
expecting a much bigger role for this. But all it ended up doing was, okay, so like at the end of the book, Dr. Stadler has gone full Joker. He's lost any
Full
vestige
Joker.
of rationality and just decides, okay, I'm going to seize control of Project X.
I reckon he's more of a
And so he
penguin
goes out
person.
there, but then Cuffy Meigs, who's like a Washington
Cuffy
person,
Meigs.
has also taken control of it. Some of the names of characters are
I
fantastic.
love that shit. Yeah, so good.
And they basically just have this like fight and start slapping the control panel of Project X and just vaporize themselves. And it's a subtle allegory for what happens to you if you're irrational. You get fucking vaporized by your sound super weapon. Yeah, but I was disappointed that that's where the plot arc or the subplot of Project X turned out. I thought there's so much potential with the Project X subplot to introduce even more tension into the plot, but she didn't go there.
Yeah.
But I mean, look, there's so much going on in this book anyway that, like, yeah, that's something I would have preferred, but it's not necessary. There's also this really good point where Hank Reardon. So Hank Reardon is just getting it from every direction. The government is making it so hard for him to make anything. And whenever he complains about it, they just say, "Oh, but you're Hank Reardon. You'll find a way. You'll find a way to produce."
Yeah.
And like he's getting to his wit's end through the power of Dagny's pussy. He's learned how to be a good objectivist. And he's, I'm not really joking when I say that. It mostly is through having sex with Dagny that Hank Reardon transforms into the objectivist Ubermensch. Lillian, his wife, who's such a cow, finds out that he's having an affair with Dagny, and Hank just doesn't back down and embraces it. Dagny says that they're having an affair on the radio. It just publicizes and says, "Yep, I don't give a shit. You can't morally bully me into stopping this because it makes me feel really good." And Hank learns to embrace that. His family, who are also really unpleasant, he basically just says to them, "Look, you're living off my charity. You can continue to do so, but you've got to shut your mouths and stop attacking me. I don't want to listen to you." He starts really laying down the law. And eventually he meets Ragnar in a field somewhere. And it's such a good scene where, and again, I thought of you in this scene where Ragnar this scene is genius. This is part of the reason why I'm so irritated with this book, because there are just so many nuggets of gold, in this case literally, that are let down by poor execution. So Ragnar has been calculating the amount of money taken by theft by the state through taxes of all of the great people who are going to be invited to the Gulch. And he's been stealing gold, and he's been stealing stuff in his piracy and selling it to a trusted third party for gold. And then he's been putting this gold into Midas Mulligan's bank in Galt's Gulch to compensate for it. So he comes up to Hank Rearden in a field in the middle of nowhere and says, "Listen, mate, all of that income tax that you've been paying, all of that slave tax you've been paying, well, it's all in a bank in gold, in sound money. It's being kept safe for you, don't worry." Just the idea of an objectivist pirate calculating how much income tax the producers of the world have been paying, stealing that from the agents of the state, converting it into gold, and then putting it into sound money bank accounts for them just genius. That's just so good.
Yeah,
it's just too funny. It's just too good.
It's fucking awesome.
And when I heard it, I just immediately thought of you. I thought, this is so Levi.
I fucking love that shit. So fucking
It is
good.
pure Levi.
I just think it's
The only
amazing.
difference is if it were in Bitcoin.
Yeah, look, they were doing their best for the technology they had, but Ayn Rand, I reckon, should be fucking frothing Bitcoin.
Ayn Rand,
She'd love
2023 Ayn Rand.
Bitcoin. She'd fucking love Bitcoin.
Just slam it into my cold storage wallet, baby.
Bro, oh my God, imagine you could rewrite that scene, except instead it gives him a private key. Amazing.
He just hands over a wallet, like a
Tracer
Bitcoin wallet. It's like,
something.
don't worry, mate. Yeah, I've got your private key
bro.
safe in safekeeping.
Don't worry, man. It's in a multi-sig. Yeah, it's fucking awesome. Yeah, it's an amazing. It's so funny though. Yeah, it is extremely
amazing.
like it. Yeah, I love that shit, but also it is pretty funny. Because it is just a pure distillation of like all the memes of these fucking like hyper libertarian folks and Bitcoiners and shit.
So when you hear about how, say, Michael Saylor loves this book,
Fucking love
I
it.
can just imagine him reading that section, screaming to himself,
yes!
going, "Ah!"
Yes! There is no other crypto asset network.
He's reading this chapter and his hands start shaking and suddenly he has to throw down his book and just run out and start mining. He has to go and buy a few GPUs so he can increase the hash power of his mining rig.
He just goes and sticks his dick in an ASIC. Starts fucking ASIC. Yeah! Fucking Bitcoin.
He just pulls off his pants and starts masturbating like a chimpanzee while he looks at his mining rig. Starts sweating from the amount of heat coming out of the room where he's mining.
Oil painting portrait of Ayn Rand in like fucking fishnets behind him.
He's smoking a cigarette, except instead of a gold dollar sign on it, he's got a gold Bitcoin logo.
Yeah. That's so fucking good. Love that shit.
What else? So what else is important in the third act? So the decline of America is so stark now. Basically, the only producers left are Hank Rearden and Dagny Taggart. Oh, actually, very important. So John Galt also leaves the Valley. So a lot of people are going into the Valley and saying like, yeah, we're never going to leave. This is it. We're going to go into the Valley for good now. Because a lot of them go in and out of the Valley.
Yeah, for like a month at a time.
But a lot of them are going there and saying, yeah, we're just going to buckle down until basically the United States of America collapses.
Yeah.
And then we're going to come out and rebuild. But Galt leaves with Dagny.
Mm.
And it turns out, and I'm sure that this was in no way motivated by how Ayn Rand wanted to be treated by men, he leaves because he wants to watch Dagny and be with her. And he wants to claim Dagny from the external world. He wants to win her. And so John Galt has been obsessed with Dagny for over a decade. So that nameless worker, he's been working at Taggart Transcontinental this entire time. That nameless worker who keeps talking to Eddie Willers and
Yeah.
asking Eddie all about Dagny in the cafeteria.
Such
That's been John Galt.
hectic.
Just
stalker
getting all of the
vibes.
juicy Dagny tidbits.
Again,
He's been a fucking creep. He'll pay Eddie Willers a few gold pieces if he can steal a pair of Dagny's panties for him to sniff or something in his like piece of shit apartment in a slum
bit of, like,
somewhere.
dirty bathwater or some shit.
Yeah, he buys her bathwater, drinks it.
Fucking John Galt. He's just a complete fucking
So
creeper.
John Galt is just the biggest simp for Dagny. He's been floating around her for over a decade, just trying to get close to her and watching her. And
Yeah. And probably
Yeah, Dagny has sex
Ayn
with
Rand
him.
probably was like, yeah, this is fucking hot. Yeah, like I fucking want to stalk her. Stalk me, John Galt.
Yeah, she was probably just I bet she was typing with one hand and just strumming herself silly while writing it the entire time.
Yeah.
Smoking like 5 cigarettes at a time, masturbating furiously, and typing out how John Galt is so obsessed with Dagny Taggart that he's worked a menial job for over a decade so he can watch her work. And it's such a Randian way of being a stalker as well, because it's specifically like of course he's physically attracted to her, but he wants to watch her work and wants to see
He's
watch
attracted
how
to
competently she works at the
her
rail.
industriousness. He's just getting off on like how fucking hard she works.
There are so many scenes in this book of Randian heroes at their desks late at night, like collapsing on their desk from tiredness, but then just pulling from deep within themselves this inner strength to keep grinding out those hours at work.
They're on the grind, man.
And
They
there's
love
one
that
scene
shit.
earlier in the book, I think when Dagny's working on the John Galt line, when she's in this shitty office because she had to split the John Galt line into a different company because the board of Taggart Transcontinental were worried about the PR implications of them working on the Galt line. But it means that Dagny's working in this shitty office, and she's collapsed on her desk and is pulling herself back up so she can keep working, and she notices the shadow of a man watching her and turns around to see who it is, but he's gone. And that was John Galt. That John Galt watching Dagny just working so hard, pushing through the tiredness. Probably had his dick in his hand and he was masturbating at the time. That's just how optimized this woman is.
Yeah. Fuck yeah, Dagny.
The
Fuck yeah.
intersection between industriousness and sexuality in this book is
Just amazing.
spectacular.
Amazing. She's like fetish.
It's so funny.
She's fetishized conscientiousness.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Which I mean, to be fair, like, you know, points for creativity. I've
I
never
mean,
seen
look, if you're going
that.
to fetishize
I've never seen that fetishized before.
No. So quite often on this podcast, we complain that books are just saying something that we've read elsewhere many times before.
No,
like when we
points for
talk about,
originality, Ayn.
like, it's far from the only thing offensive about white nationalism, but one of the things that we often complain about with reference to white nationalism is just we've heard all this stuff before, that they have nothing new to say. Whereas I can say Atlas Shrugged, apart from the other novels that Ayn Rand has written, is something very new.
Yeah.
I haven't come across something quite like her novels before.
Yeah, man, she doesn't give a fuck. I like it. So,
So
I think
the
we're getting close
government's
to the end of
attacking
the plot,
Hank
right?
Rearden. Yeah, Hank Rearden eventually just breaks through and is ready to be swept away to Galt's Gulch because, like, the government organises. The government has been infiltrating his workforce with saboteurs for a while, and they make them start trying to ruin Hank Rearden's mills. And what the government wants to do is say that it's because Hank Rearden has been treating his workers so badly that they violently revolted, and then use this as a pretext to try to bully Hank Rearden into basically just selling everything he has to the government. And this is a really funny point where there's this plot arc with this character that's called Wet Nurse for ages. It's some young man who's appointed by the government to make sure that Hank Rearden is complying with government regulation. And this guy obviously resents Rearden, but also admires him. And over the course of the book, so this man is intelligent but irrational to begin with. But over the course of the book, through proximity to a man as rational as Hank Rearden, this guy becomes more and more rational and eventually starts asking Hank Rearden if he can have a real job at the mills, if he can work at a smelter or something like that. And then eventually his plot arc is closed when he sacrifices his life to protect Hank Rearden's mills from these looters, from the union members who are trying to destroy the mills for the government. And he dies in Hank Rearden's arms. And it's a really drawn out scene where this guy's been shot and he's telling Hank Rearden about how much he admires Hank Rearden and how much he likes industriousness and the power of ideas and rationality.
And can he just get a little bit of his bathwater before he dies? Come on, mate. Fucking, I just need to drink me some of that fountain of fucking youth, pure industriousness. Give it to me, Hank.
Can I just see your asshole once, Hank? Please.
I bet it's perfect pocket butthole, Hank. Please, Hank.
just give me a taste before I die.
Perfect objectivist rimming scene.
But this is the sort of scene I can imagine it in a Hollywood movie. There's the redemptive plot arc of some character who was initially antagonistic towards one of the heroes, but has come to see the light, and this character sacrifices themselves for the hero and dies in their arms and delivers a deathbed soliloquy. And
fantastic.
It really is that, except the deathbed monologue is about the importance of industriousness and objectivist philosophy. It's just so good.
It's just unrelenting, isn't it? The objectivist monologues. It's unrelenting. It does
not stop. Ayn Rand she's relentless. I'll give her this. She stayed on target the entire time.
She was.
There are many things that I do not think need to be in this book, but she never lost sight of the fact that she was trying to convince you to be an objectivist.
Yeah, I don't know if it was convincing or just like smashing you over the head with it. It's just like you will be a fucking objectivist
convincing
by the end of this motherfucking book.
It was just her slapping you in the face over and over again and screaming at you that you were going to be an objectivist now.
Great scene.
Yeah. And then this scene gets even better because fucking Francisco shows up. Because Hank Rearden is also running around trying to stop unionists from trashing his mills while his good workers are fighting back. And then a bunch of jackbooted unionist thugs knock him to the ground. But then some lithe, supple, athletic shadow jumps out and starts fucking shooting them. And it's Francisco D'Anconia just shooting unionists to protect Hank Rearden.
It's the most ridiculous shit.
Everything you could want. Evil, brutish unionists smashing a symbol of capitalism, getting shot dead by an objectivist hero.
By like the perfect, most athletic, most talented young stud, the fucking stallion.
Yeah,
Francisco
and she makes sure to tell you, with what elan he shoots these people. Francisco's good at everything, including shooting dead 3 unionists.
So
he's good at everything except keeping Dagny satisfied in the sack. He couldn't keep her. This is why it's so hard. I keep vacillating over whether I would recommend this book or not because it has so many problems. But there are scenes like this, or there are so many scenes which are just so. There's such a good combination of being well paced and well written, but also just conceptually so funny that when you take a step back and think, oh no, this is like Batman beating up thugs, except the thugs are unionists and Batman is a really good
It's
capitalist.
just a capitalist, yeah.
Just on so many levels fantastic that I'm really torn as to whether I'd recommend this book or not. She does so much to make me not want to recommend it, but then redeems herself with sections like Francisco D'Ancona shooting unionists dead to save.
Or the occasional
Save
like
Hank Reed.
hyper fucking like borderline BDSM sex scene or something.
Yeah. BDSM sex scene combined with like both characters relating to the BDSM sex scene from an objectivist standpoint, like from an obnoxious objectivist standpoint. Talking about forcing the victory from the other person and overcoming them in becoming the object of their desire and the object which they use to fulfill their own desire.
Yeah, BDSM meets objectivism. Pretty fucking strange mixture.
This is like, it's because this book is well known, at least in certain circles, but I think it's such a good fit for this podcast because it is so bizarre. It is just such a strange book. The whole concept of it is so odd.
Yeah, it is a really strange book, isn't it?
It is bizarre. Made even stranger by the fact that it's so influential.
So we're almost at the end here.
We're basically at the end.
We'll still chat about some other things.
Yeah, of the plot. I would say so. Importantly, and this was delivered in such superhero dialogue. John Galt tells Dagny that the only person who can destroy him is her. That the only person who could lead the looters to John Galt is Dagny. And John Galt finally announces himself to America in by far the worst part of the book.
Yeah, I knew you would.
And a part of the book
part of the book, I knew you were going to hate this one.
Yeah, if I were not reading it for the podcast, I would have stopped here. Where
the ultimate objectivist
John
monologue.
Fuck this part. I was so angry when I got to this part. I'm not joking. When I got to this part, I thought, you fucking bitch. How fucking dare you
just submitted you to like
this?
20 pages of just fucking ranting.
I stopped reading at this part. Like, because I'll normally, so each day to get through books for the podcast, I will have a certain amount of time that I want to read for. And I just stopped reading this at that point, which I haven't done before. I was so angry. So,
well, like Nation of Islam, Fug, or whatever. Like, never before.
No, this is what really
fucking
angry.
broke Jack. John Galt's motherfucking monologue on the radio is what broke Jack.
It wasn't even the content of the monologue. It was the how aesthetically offensive this is. So she was building up really good plot momentum. And so the thing with Ayn Rand is she builds up good plot momentum. She can pace a novel, but then repeatedly shoots herself in the foot. When she's got plot movement, then she's like, okay, time for an objectivist monologue, and she kills all of the momentum she's built up. This is the worst example of that. Things were really moving. Like, America's falling apart. The looters in government are panicking and trying to work out what to do. Dagny and Hank Rearden have broken through. They're objectivists. I thought, yeah, now it's like I am actually enjoying myself. And then John Galt delivers this speech over the radio to the nation. And it is literally 60 pages long of just repeating the same objectivist things that she's been saying for the rest of the book. I was reading it thinking, you've told me this. You do not need to do this. She killed dead all of that momentum she'd been building up. It's so infuriating. She had something that was working and just grinds it to a halt because she can't help herself. It's like, oh, maybe the reader's not intelligent enough to understand what I've been telling him for the past fucking 1,000 pages. So, no, we get it. You do not need to stop the plot for 60 pages to just repeat yourself. I was so angry at this point that she ruined the pacing of the book.
I really like this book. But I think on this particular issue, I'm going to have to take Jack's side. Ayn fucked it. As you said, it's a 1,200 page book. It's like littered with objectivist monologues. Like, she could have had John Galt do his, like, I think it's cool, the idea, like, this is, you know, that scene from
this should have been the climax.
V for Vendetta, when V, I don't know, whatever the fuck, the guy who plays,
the guy in the Guy Fawkes mask, like whatever his name is.
I was calling Guy Fawkes. When he gets on the telly, it's that scene. It's like, okay, you've got your monologue. All right, like 2 minutes. You got 2 minutes, baby. You got 2 minutes. No.
Yeah.
Like, just no, like give us.
There are sections of
give
this.
Us the crux.
Like afterwards, it is acknowledged in the book that people say the speech took 2 hours.
Yeah. It's like two or 3 hours. Speech.
Ayn Rand knows full well that it's so long.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, no, she didn't have to fucking do that. But
and this, because of the way the book was moving, this should have been, if not the climax, then one of the really high points. Because this is where John Galt, who up to now has been nothing but this figure that no one knows who he is. He's this saying, who is John Galt?
Who is he?
The country is falling apart. Things are accelerating. The plot has so much momentum behind it. This should have been the moment where he reveals himself to the world, and it should have been big. But instead, like she made him just talk for 60 pages about stuff that we already know as readers, that she's already told us.
Yeah, it's pretty cooked. I reckon she cooked it.
This was just, this was such a fumble.
I'll give you that. She cooked it. She cooked it there. Yeah. The rest of it, the gold in the field shit and the pirate objectivism and all that sort of shit, awesome. Fucking awesome.
Like, that's good stuff.
It's fucking good shit. And then just this Galt monologue, yeah, nah.
After this, it gets a lot of fun again. Like, for all my complaints about Atlas Shrugged, I had a lot of fun reading it. There were moments, it really is the objectivist monologues where I got very irritated and I wasn't enjoying myself. But apart from that, I had a lot of fun with this book.
I think that's fair.
After the 60-page John Galt monologue, the book gets a lot of fun again.
Yeah, so I guess
her editor really needed to pull her aside and say, you do not need this.
Yeah, it's just like, as I think I've said before, it's like show don't tell. You know, like I think she's a very fucking good writer. A lot of, like, I really like her descriptions of like people and landscapes and, you know, some of the dialogue, the shorter dialogues, even if they're kind of hyper realistic, you know, like comic book sort of style. I still thought that the dialogue was good, that sort of thing. But then, yeah, having the monologues where she's like,
yeah, that is just let me tell you because I don't trust you enough to have picked up on what I was saying.
Yeah, and you know, like monologues have a place in theatre and literature and stuff. So it can be done well, done properly, but she certainly didn't. Yeah, well, I don't know. I guess certainly in your opinion, Jack.
I think actually,
had not mastered.
She could cut out all of the monologues except for the final John Galt monologue, which makes sense because it's delivered over the radio. Except make it 3 pages.
Yeah.
So with some of the monologues, because with the monologues, sometimes the people will be saying things I agree with, and if they were much shorter, they would be very funny. So, for example, at James Taggart's wedding, Francisco D'Anconia shows up.
Gives a speech about money.
And then just starts talking about the value of money.
Like, money is fucking awesome.
And so conceptually, that's hilarious. And if it were a short speech, I would have enjoyed it because, again, just that image of some some dude showing up and saying, okay, let me red pill you on money is hilarious. And he said things that I agree with, that like money is not something that confers value. Ultimately, the value of money is conferred by what people trade for it. He was saying actually quite a few things that I don't really have a problem with. It's just how it's delivered. It's so obnoxious and very repetitive.
I wonder why she was so repetitive. Like, why she didn't feel as though like some of the points she was making could have been said once or twice, and instead she said them just like a bunch. Like, kept on saying it.
Yeah, because it's not as if this is a particularly subtle book. So in her dialogue, for example, which I expect you like more than I do, it's pretty
Some of it.
blunt. Like it's slapping you in the face with what she's trying to communicate. It's not like it's hard to understand what she's saying with it. The rest of the book is clear enough about what she's saying.
They're caricatures. Caricatures of the enemy, and caricatures
they're
of
massive caricatures,
and caricatures of, you know, like the people that, or the point of view that she likes.
And that's
I just read it through like
that's not an innately bad thing.
I imagined it in almost like a film noir kind of vibe. Like when I was playing, like in the video in my head of this was very noir. So it's like, yeah, the dialogue was like overdone, but I always had this kind of like LA noir or like, you know, Blade Runner-esque sort of the dialogue's overdone, but it's like kind of intentional. Like it's in the style. You know, that's what I was expecting. That's at least what I was imagining as I was reading it.
Yeah, it's very, very obvious dialogue. She's obviously communicating a point, but that obviates the need for all of these monologues.
Yeah.
Well, they could just be shorter. So if we're talking about the Francisco Dianco speech on the value of money to James Taggart's wedding party, like he could have just made that, or like I'm talking about Francisco, Ayn Rand could have made that much shorter and it would have had a greater effect because in terms of the scene, that's so funny. I want that in there. I want him to deliver a speech on the value of money to a wedding party just because it's such a funny concept. But it doesn't need to be as long or as didactic as it is.
I think you used a good word, didactic, in this sense. Like, I think like advocating a point of view can be good, like with Ayn Rand. But yeah, at times not being like she's just bludgeoning you over the head with her point of view.
Yeah, it feels almost like you've got this novel, which is fun, but in order to read it, she stops you regularly, and it's almost like, okay, time to eat your vegetables, time to go to class before you can keep reading the fun novel. And it ruins the flow of the novel.
Yeah. I'm going to watch the films, and I'm wondering if they're going to cut those fucking giant monologues out. Surely they'll have to. Like,
oh, they would have to, unless they want 10-hour movies.
No, they're like an hour and a half each. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, after this speech, the government is aware of who John Galt is. And interestingly, it's Dr. Stadler recognizes his voice and immediately says, you've got to kill this guy. This guy cannot be allowed to live. He will destroy you. And eventually, so Dagny Taggart is placed under surveillance because the government people say, okay, they don't use the word objectivist, but they basically say, yep, she's an objectivist, so she's the most likely to have access to John Galt or to know who he is.
Mm.
So they follow her. And eventually, Dagny is basically just too wet for John Galt not to visit him. And she finds where he lives on the Taggart transcontinental payroll and goes to visit him. I don't think they have sex. They definitely smooch for a while. And he shows her his workshop in his little slum apartment that he's been living in, basically just so he can keep stalking Dagny Taggart. The government people have followed her. They find him. She pretends she agreed this with Galt before they were found, that she's going to pretend that she doesn't know him, And as an aside, I reckon this is another one of Ayn Rand's kinks, because with basically all the men that Dagny is having sex with, she's not allowed to tell anyone else about their love. She seemed to have a thing for hidden love
really
and for in public
hidden love and affairs and stuff.
And not only affairs, but in public having to denigrate the person you're having sex with. So in public, Dagny Taggart's having to say, "Oh, I don't like John Galt. He tried to destroy my railroad. Do what you want with him. I don't care about him." That seems to be a... And then the relationship with Hank Rearden was something similar as well. That seems to be something that Ayn Rand liked.
Very complex sexuality.
Yeah. And she gives you 1,200 pages to meditate on her sexual preferences. The government... This is really funny. So at this stage, people in the government acknowledge that they need people like John Galt or Hank Rearden or Dagny Taggart to mooch off of. And they eventually start torturing John Galt, telling him that he must be productive for them and he must lead them. They start trying to force the control of the economy onto John Galt, and are like, they hook him up to this machine that just delivers him electric shocks. And are shouting at him. It's like, you must lead us. You must be our dictator.
I want ideas. Give me ideas.
We want ideas. Give us ideas.
Very kinky scene. Very kinky scene.
And then comes one of my favourite scenes in the book. This scene is... Ayn Rand almost redeems herself here for the John Galt speech with this scene. Almost. And this scene is a good scene. So basically, Francisco D'Anconia... I don't think we mentioned... So Francisco D'Anconia's... Playboy lifestyle is a front. So he's been an agent of John Galt this entire time.
The whole time.
So throughout this book, he's been softening up Hank Rearden, turning up at Hank Rearden's office and then telling him about how good objectivism is and stuff like that.
And he's doing psyops on Rearden.
Yeah. So Francisco, Dagny, Hank Rearden and Ragnar launch an assault.
This is like the fucking
on the black site prison where John Galt is being held and tortured by the government.
The objectivist.
This bit is so good.
The objectivist Avengers come in, sweep the fuck in to like wipe out the statist fucking parasites and the unionists and the.
So it's full of this place is full of jackbooted thugs who are elite soldiers who are good at following orders but not good at thinking. There's this scene where Hank Rearden I think he's unarmed, just walks into like the break room full of elite soldiers and starts talking, basically disarms them using facts and logic. He does Ben Shapiro on them. He destroys them using facts full and
Ben
logic.
Shapiro on that shit.
Goes Ben Shapiro mode on them. And then while they're stunned with his facts and logic, one of them shoots him in the shoulder and he just shrugs it off like a champion. And then while they're stunned with facts and logic, Ragnar jumps through a window and shoots them dead.
That's fucking incredible. It's so fucking good.
It is so good. It's
like Ben Shapiro teams up with fucking Maverick from Top Gun to fucking shoot some goddamn...
No, with Jocko Willing.
Yeah, with Jocko Willing.
Ben Shapiro and Jocko Willing.
To shoot some fucking government bureaucrats.
And then, this scene is, wow. Yeah, they find John Galt, who's fine, and they give him a cigarette to smoke with a $ sign on it. And he has a dart.
Out fucking standing.
Dagny, in front of the two other men that she's been stringing along like a fuckboy, like hugs John Galt and is like, "Oh, I'm so glad you're safe, John." And then they escape and fly away in a plane. And then I love this bit where they're flying over New York and they see the lights just go out in New York.
Yeah.
And they're like,
I actually really like that bit.
The looters have collapsed.
Yeah, collapses,
and
the lights
then
go out, the electricity collapses.
To make it even better, they hear like other planes which are in the air talking to them. And it turns out almost everyone from Galt's Gulch, like Midas Mulligan, Judge Narragansett or whatever he's called, Ellis Wyatt, Ken Daniger, all these titans of industry also went out and were camped out in positions around this black site prison. And in the event that the Avengers of Objectivism were unable to free John Galt, then the rest of these titans of industry would have launched an assault on the prison.
That's fucking incredible.
It's so good. It's just incredible.
All the capitalists fucking get up in arms.
All of the capitalists would have launched an assault on this bastion of parasitism. And then, okay, so
it's so fucking absurd.
With,
it's so fucking absurd. It's so fucking good.
Eddie Willers, though. So Eddie Willers has been in San Francisco putting down. Basically, there's been unrest in California. California's seceding, and there's a civil war there, and it's threatening one of the Taggart transcontinental terminals. So Eddie Willers flies there. And he says not a tearful goodbye, but an almost tearful goodbye to Dagny, where he basically confesses his love to her. And she just goes like, yeah, thanks, mate. Go fix that problem in San Fran. Probably won't see you again.
Fuck boy. She doesn't give a shit.
Oh.
She just
does not give a fuck
breaking
about
hearts all over the fucking country.
Smoking darts and breaking hearts. That's Dagny Taggart.
Smoking darts and breaking hearts. That's so good.
So what he...
I want to get a fucking t-shirt made of that. That's a great one. Smoking darts and breaking hearts. and just on the t-shirt, I want it to be
a picture of Ayn Rand smoking a cigarette
with a fucking dollar, with a golden dollar sign on it.
With a dollar sign, with a
fat
Bitcoin
fucking cigarette.
sign.
Yeah, golden billet, and maybe some like I don't know, like some fucking Bitcoin laser eyes or some shit.
Yeah, the laser eyes. So, Eddie Willers' story ends on a cliffhanger. You don't know what happens to him because he's on this train, transcontinental train, and it breaks down in the middle of Arizona in a desert. No one on the train is competent. No one knows how to fix anything. So, the train's broken down and a caravan of horse-drawn carriages moves by and picks up everyone else on the train, but Eddie will not give up Taggart Transcontinental, so he just stays with the train. He's like, look, if I die here, fine. And we don't know what happens to Eddie, and I find it interesting. This point really drives home what Ayn Rand was trying to say about people who are rational but not smart, in that they are dependent upon objectivist heroes. So Eddie can't fix the train by himself. He can't make it run. That's what Dagny can do, but not Eddie. So people like Eddie are good people. They're rational. But ultimately, they rely on objectivists or upon intelligent objectivists like Dagny. And it's left ambiguous. Maybe the Galt's Gulch Brigade will come in and save Eddie, but maybe he'll just starve to death in the train in the middle of Arizona. Dagny, though, lives happily ever after. She makes it to the Gulch.
Fucked by Ragnar.
Fucked from all directions.
And fucking Galt, John Galt, and yeah, just having a big fuck fest. Is she the only woman?
Yeah, exactly.
She's the only woman
she'll
there.
let Francisco smell her feet or something because she's feeling generous. Well, not generous. I mean, like, for her own amusement.
I think she's the only woman in
gratification.
Galt's Gulch.
No, there was one. There's an author who was there and who does things like likes plot, and that's why she's in Galt's Gulch. And then I think there's an actress who's Ragnar's wife, who's also a woman. But it's a sausage fest.
And at any rate, Dagny's still the fucking like alpha female.
Oh, she's
definitely the alpha.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. Well, she snagged John Galt. John Galt has been simping for her for a decade plus.
12 years, yeah.
she's the queen bitch.
So funny.
Of Galt's Gulch.
Fucking funny.
She did tie up the plot points in a satisfying way at the end of the book. All right. In terms of themes, I think... So I've gone over already my way of viewing much of this book along these axes of rational, irrational, intelligent, unintelligent. So we've got intelligent, irrational characters like Dr. Stadler who end up badly. You've got rational but unintelligent characters like Eddie Willers. You've got unintelligent, irrational characters like Lillian, Hank Rearden's ex-wife by the end of the book. And then you've got the optimized Ubermenschen who are rational and intelligent, like basically all the people who live in God's Gulch. Got a few things. It is interesting what she thinks of love and romance. So these come up a lot in the book. And she obviously regards love, sex, romance, and pleasure all as extremely important, but ultimately they're only available to people who acknowledge reality. And love has to be earned. She has a few moments where you'll have a character like, for example, Lillian. So it's illustrative to compare Lillian's view of love with that of Dagny's. So there's this point in the book where Lillian tells Hank Rearden, her husband, that to love someone who's deserving of it is not impressive, and it's not anything virtuous, because what virtue is there, what sacrifice is there in giving someone what they deserve? It's, in fact, loving someone who is undeserving of love is virtuous, and the more virtuous it is, the less deserving they are. Or to love someone even less deserving of love is even more virtuous because you are making a sacrifice. And Ayn Rand believes that making a sacrifice is a bad thing.
Yeah, living for
And
others.
this is compared with Dagny's idea of love, in that she believes that you only love things that are earned. So, for example, the first time she had sex, she loses her virginity in this great scene where she and Francisco de Anconia have a tennis match. And it's a really hard-fought tennis match. And they're really trying to beat each other, and she wins. And then they have sex. She has seen that Francisco de Anconia is worthy of love and worthy of having sex with and worthy of desire because he's so good at everything, including tennis. But then she finds Hank Rearden, who's even better. And so she starts having sex with him. And then she finds John Galt, who's even more worthy, and starts having sex with him. And there's no sacrifice at all. Instead of loving someone who doesn't deserve love, she just transfers her love to the person who's even more worthy of it. And at least in Ayn Rand's telling, this is based upon an acknowledgement of reality. This is rational.
Yeah.
And she does say at several points that the people, well, I was going to say person, but really people, because Ayn Rand wasn't a one-man kind of girl. The people whom you have sex with are an expression of your values, a very concrete expression of your values. And if you're just roving around for the next muscle-bound, super handsome, objectivist superhero, then your values have got to be pretty good, actually.
Yeah. So funny. What's that thing that the red pillars are always going about? Hypergamy.
Hypergamy, yeah. Hypergamy, except you're optimizing for objectivism.
Objectivist superheroes. Giga Chads like Rearden, Michael Saylor. Just getting all that fucking objectivist pussy.
Michael Saylor is John Galt. Actually, what about her view of women? Because I've heard from several places that Ayn Rand was just fundamentally misogynistic. And I think it's much more complicated than that.
Yeah. I find
'Cause
that
she seems-
difficult to agree with.
She seems to dislike this. She calls it femininity, but femininity and being a woman for her don't seem to be the same thing. So she regards femininity as this passivity and unwillingness to take responsibility or make decisions, and almost this decorativeness that Ayn Rand herself didn't really seem to identify with. And the women in Ayn Rand's stories who were good characters also don't seem to identify with it. So I think you can take the character of Lillian as being what Ayn Rand regarded as femininity to an absurd degree. All she does is really mooch off her husband, insult her husband. She won't take responsibility for anything, even to the point where she'll insult Hank Rearden, and then when he gets angry, she'll start laughing and say, "Oh, you shouldn't take everything so seriously. It was just a joke." And eventually she's kicked to the curb because Hank Rearden meets a real woman in Dagny Taggart. And then the characteristics of taking responsibility for things, of producing, of being rational, Ayn Rand seems to describe as masculine. And again, masculinity doesn't have to mean being a man. For example, James Taggart doesn't demonstrate any of these masculine characteristics. And so I think that's where some of the charges of being misogynistic come from in Ayn Rand's stories. I don't think actually for her, femininity and being a woman were exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and I think that maybe like there are aspects of Dagny that are very feminine and that she highlights. It's just not her entire character. And and it seems as though as far as I can see, I might be wrong about this, Ayn Rand is railing against, what do you call it, like the monolithic view of femininity and women, and especially if she's coming from like Russia and going into America in the 50s, like probably wasn't that much space for like what was acceptable behavior stuff for women. So I think that's not, I don't think it's misogyny. I think she's extremely like incendiary. She like really wants to get up and like make a strong point about things. And I also think that she also wanted to embrace like sexuality, like female sexuality. So
yeah,
I know. I
it's
wouldn't
also
say
throughout the book,
misogynist.
Dagny Taggart is like, you'll have some invariably irrational characters dismiss Dagny because she's a woman, and then Dagny just leaves them behind in the dust because she's such an objectivist. So Ayn Rand is making the point that if you're a woman, you can achieve things. You just need the right mindset. You just need that objectivist mindset.
Yeah, you need that objectivist mindset, mate.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have much more to say about this other than I think the accusations of her being anti-women are pretty unfair.
No.
I guess like the rape scenes are also brought out in favour of that.
I think like
with those,
I
think that is mostly
this
just
book.
Ayn Rand really got off on that.
I interpreted this book as like a feminist book, personally, and I hadn't read like a feminist critique of Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
But when I was reading, I was like, oh, she's a feminist.
Yeah. I expect most of the people criticising her for being anti-women haven't actually read her books.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to make that case having read Atlas Shrugged, and while this is not an episode on The Fountainhead, also having read The Fountainhead. Value and money, do you have much to say on her view of value?
Not a huge amount. Just,
Much of what she says about money, actually, I quite liked. She was saying the fundamental unit of value is sort of production and thought, not theft. Yeah, fine. And she included in theft just like printing more money and then telling people that it's valuable.
Yeah. Taxation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Money is a tool of productive people ultimately, because it's the root of its value is in producing things.
Yeah.
Not taking things.
Yeah.
I did like the quote, money is a living power that dies without its root. So without this root of making stuff, money dies.
Yeah, well, the classic way to put it is like printing more money doesn't create more wealth. Just redistributes the wealth.
Yeah. And you can see where von Mises would just froth it over this.
Yeah.
In terms, actually, so this is an interesting thing she does. She says that basically everything that is objectivist is a philosophy of life. It's embracing your vital life force. It is living for yourself. It's embracing your desires and living for your own joy. And doing the opposite is the philosophy of death and decay and not building things. It's a philosophy of entropy. And I found this pretty funny because it's Ayn Rand, so everything is put in the most unsubtle terms, the most like brick to the head terms that she possibly can. It's what's a good thing, being alive. So my philosophy is that of life. And people who don't agree with me, people who like things like income tax, subscribe to a philosophy of death. And there's this great scene. It's when John Galt is being tortured. In witnessing this, James Taggart eventually realizes that he wants to die, that everything he's doing is because he doesn't embrace life, but only embraces death. And he's just like suddenly disarmed and all of the life force goes out of him and he just wanders out of the room and disappears. I found that so funny.
Yeah, I like that scene.
Something actually that I don't think Ayn Rand really addresses is the problem of violence.
No, not in this book.
So she says that, at least in this book, so I haven't read any of her straight philosophical texts. I've only read her novels. But at least in this, she seems to be saying that between two people who are rational, there will never be this sort of conflict that could lead to violence. And she also seems to rule out the possibility of someone who is rational and intelligent and who wants to dominate others using violence. So I'm not sure why there couldn't exist, for example, a John Galt who wants to achieve his aims with violence. And I think for her, she gets out of it by saying, well, if you're rational, then you don't want to use violence. But I don't think that maps onto the world outside of Atlas Shrugged very well.
Yeah, it's like when I looked at her interviews, she brings up like, not coercing others, not doing things to others without their consent, that sort of stuff. Which is kind of like standard libertarian objectivist thing, like ethic around non-coercion. But it's kind of just how do I put it? Just like, this is how you should act. And is it an injunction, or is it like what you said, where it's just like, if you're rational, you'll see what I'm talking about, and you will act like this, which I find unconvincing. Like, yes, I agree, you shouldn't. Like, I don't like coercing people, and I'd prefer it if people didn't coerce me, and it'd be good to have a world with less coercion.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess it might just be one of those things that is it almost like an article of faith or something? Like, I've never seen anybody be able to like go beyond just saying like, this is a good thing, or you should behave like this. But yeah, maybe that's like the limit of what you can say with those sorts of like ethical claims.
Yeah, because at least in the context of objectivism, you really shouldn't take things as articles of faith. They should all be derived from,
or maybe
a rational perception of the world. But
if I tried to like think what is like productive, like if you're an objectivist and you value productivity, then like maybe there's an argument that coercing people is not maximally productive, or like doing something destructive like war or theft. Like that's a destructive thing to do, not a productive thing to do. So it's inherently anti-objectivist.
I guess because she really seems to be saying in this book that there is no, you can't be productive, and she calls them looters. So you can't be productive and be a looter at the same time. It's either one or the other.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure why you couldn't have someone who is productive, or for example, an organization of people that is productive and makes things such that they can dominate others and take their stuff. Because this is something that she does throughout the book, is she's very, very binary with things. Either you are rational and behave in this prescribed way, or you are irrational and you must behave in this way.
Yeah.
And within the context of Atlas Shrugged, it works, but I don't think it maps very neatly to the external world, like to the objective world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have much else to say about
with regard
Atlas
to
Shrugged?
the coercion stuff? Not really. I guess it's just one of those things where is there always going to be some sort of axiom like that? I don't know if there'll always be those sorts of things, except I've not seen like an ethical system of thought that doesn't have something like that somewhere in it if you poke around enough.
Yeah. What about more generally about Atlas Shrugged? Because I feel like I don't have much more to say. I can give more examples of things I've already said, but I don't have much.
I think it's I really liked it. I thought it was a great book. With the caveats of like the criticisms that I've made already, but like I really enjoyed it. Gets me pumped up, makes me want to like go and like make something cool. You know, like go and be like, yeah, fuck yeah, let's make some sick software or whatever the fuck. And just like do it. And I think what I really appreciated about her, about this book, is just like about, and in praise of Ayn Rand, I'd say like she's unapologetic about just like defending the value of things like pursuing self-interest, doing great things for the sake of doing them, like regarding people as an end in and of themselves, and regarding like doing great things like great literature or great architecture or whatever. Like it doesn't need to be justified from like this is good for the world, or it's just good in and of itself because the person who created it thought it was a beautiful thing to do. And I think like in a world where there is an overwhelming, well, at least from my perspective, like just an intense amount of like collectivization, and there's the ever-present threat of like more and more taxes, more and more inflation, more and more like regulations and red tape, and more people who want to like do things on your behalf without your consent for your benefit, apparent benefit. Like to have people like Ayn Rand or von Mises or whoever, or they're like they can be abrasive, but I think like they've made really important contributions to the world, and I really valued that. I think like more people would benefit, I think, if they like didn't apologize for like doing the things that they think are beautiful.
Yeah, I'd agree with that point, that I do like in Ayn Rand that she really celebrates human intellectual achievements of doing things like, okay, with knowledge we can build a bridge and move something heavier than the bridge over a gap. That is cool. I also like that she does say that you shouldn't apologize to people for being smart or hardworking or successful, because I think a lot of it is motivated by envy. Like there are a lot of people who see someone doing something really cool and feel envious and reflexively want to dislike them. So in Australia, there's tall puppy syndrome, which is
it's terrible. I hate
very present and a real problem.
I think it's
and a really gross way of viewing the world and living life.
Yeah. There's this.
I really like that Ayn Rand very bluntly says you shouldn't do that. If you're doing something well, you should be proud of it.
She pushes back against that.
I like that a lot.
She says like there's this interview with her where they're talking about like like raising children or something. She's like, you should teach your child to not be ashamed of their successes. Like you should like celebrate them, allow them to like, if they do something good, like let them own it. Like that's awesome. And I was thinking like, I don't know, there were, like moments when I was younger where like definitely, like parents or like my mom was encouraging, but there are other moments where it's like, I think if I look at it through the perspective of Ayn Rand, I think like there's an unnecessary amount of just like, self minimization unnecessarily. It's like, okay, I don't want to be like gloat and shit. Like, I don't want to be obnoxious. But at the same time, it's like if you do something well, you do something good,
like own it, because you're gonna have to own it when you fuck up, and you're not gonna have a choice then. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's right. It is also, so I do think she's frequently mischaracterized. She seems to be often characterized by people who have never read something she said as wanting to just crush the poor.
Yeah, I don't.
Whereas she doesn't
see
say that
in this book.
I think in this book, she really seems to be saying that you should just let people who are good at making things do that. So it's the John Galt thing that he says, I think it's get the hell out of my way. Yeah. As you said, very abrasively put. But what she's effectively saying is, like, they shouldn't go around just dominating everyone, but you should let them make stuff without interfering.
And to be fair,
as
like,
they make you feel inadequate.
When there are people, like, sure, okay, like, I'm going to put aside, like, really, like, people who put their creativity towards, like, dominating others, like certain dictators. Very talented, actually, very smart, talented people.
Yeah, which she doesn't acknowledge. Yeah.
Very smart, talented people like Putin, like, guys probably, like, a fucking workhorse, like, super smart and stuff. But he's just putting it towards vicious ends. But, like, then there's other people who, you might think he's an asshole, like Elon Musk. It's like, oh yeah, okay, like, I don't like him as, you might not like him as a person, but motherfucker's out there, like, literally, like, trying to get us to Mars. And it's like, do we really, like...
Yeah, it's like, I wouldn't have him over for dinner.
No.
But...
And it's like...
I have to acknowledge, he's a very, very capable engineer and business.
And he's important. Like, we need somebody trying to do things like that. We need people who are willing to sacrifice 80 hours a week for 40 years and, like, destroy their families and stuff, and, for these crazy visions like the Steve Jobs and stuff, who are going to build these amazing organizations and create these technologies. And yeah, like, I don't necessarily think that means that they can just do whatever they want, like they, like, harm other people. But at the same time, it's like, well, why would we get in the way of these people who are trying to do productive things?
Yeah, and this is where some of Ayn Rand's very black and white thinking, I think, comes to hurt her. So I'm willing to regard it within the context of her novels as a literary device that productive people, or these objectivist, rational superheroes, don't have negative effects, or there are no negative externalities from them working. Whereas in life outside of Atlas Shrugged, I think just by virtue of the fact that people if people are pursuing their own ends, those ends can differ from each other.
Yeah.
So your objectivist superhero just doing what they want might have negative externalities, and Ayn Rand doesn't really acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Which is why I guess you can't just take what is said in Atlas Shrugged and try to apply it one-to-one to the world outside of the novel.
I guess if I had to sort of come up with a framework for thinking about it, I might think about it in terms of, like, a pendulum swinging, and, like, I don't know, it's got a bunch of different tethers on it, and each of those tethers is pulling it in a different direction. And, like, I think that there's and do I think this in general, or is this just because I've read Atlas Shrugged? I don't know. Like, tentatively, I think that, like, over the course of our lifetime, at least the last, like, 10 years or so since I finished high school and started, like, got out into the rest of the world, like, the collectivization, ethics stuff in the culture, in, like, laws and stuff, like, seems to be increasing. I don't know. That's just a very vague sense I have, and that we actually need, like, people, whether it's through objectivism or libertarianism or just classical liberalism or some other things, like, advocating for, like, hey, we still need a safeguard, like, safeguard like, individuals going out there and trying to do these things.
When you say collectivism, like, what sorts of collectivism? Do you mean, for example, reducing someone to their
group
race, gender, or sexuality, say, increasing, or on the business side, increasing regulations, telling people how they can run a particular business? What are the sort of...
both. And even things like the collectivization response to, like, in Australia to COVID. Like, there's no, like, sense of, like, low-level, granular, community-level, like, decision-making. Like, individual, family, community-level decision-making. It was just, like, at the state. There wasn't, I guess, like, federal wasn't as much, but, like, the state level stuff is just like, I don't know, like obviously I left Victoria because I disagree with the way they handle that so much. Like I'm just never going back to Victoria ever again. And so like a big part of the reason why I left Victoria is because of their response to COVID. Like I just don't want to live in a state where they're going to do that to me and other people. So, and the reason why, like all the reasons why they brought that stuff in is all collectivist reasons.
Oh, as in like as an individual, if you are willing to take the risk of getting infected, then that's your...
Yeah, there's no scope for that. There's not. I'm okay putting myself at risk. No, you're not. We had fucking the Australian Federal Police rolling around like North Fitzroy, dude. Like, fuck that. No, fuck that. Yeah, no, fuck that. I left that. Never moved back to Victoria. Fuck them. Yeah, so that's that, and it's worse when the collectivization comes through the state because then it's bureaucratic and it's heartless and it's soulless. You know, there's other like less institutional, like more sort of just like implicit collectivization, which is also a thing that I struggle with. But through the state is really dangerous.
And at what level of collectivization would you accept? Because I think a degree of it is necessary for people to live in large groups. Like you need for example, say a cultural form of collectivism in that people need to have some shared social mores, some sense of belonging to something similar for if it's a shared culture or a shared language or a shared state or nationality.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying you need to give me a defined point at which it becomes unacceptable, but which forms of collectivism would you find, or do you find acceptable, and which ones are? You've given examples of ones that you don't like.
Yeah. I think that like, well, I'm just ad-libbing here. That's a good question. So I don't know if I'll be able to form a terribly coherent response. Like, well, firstly, like it being voluntary is important. So like voluntary association. So like I'm voluntarily like, I don't know, I move to a community. I want to be part of the community, or I go to say, I don't know, a church or whatever religious group you might be a part of, or I join a particular book club's Discord. So there's that first thing. And preferably if there's a mechanism for like voluntarily delegating like my participation to like whatever the decision making mechanism is. So, you know, like if it's a part of a church, you know, like standard Anglican church or something, it's like a sort of like implicit understanding that like the church has like an organizational structure and that there's a leadership and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of collectivization where in and of the fact that I happen to be a member of a particular group, whether it's my ethnic group, like being an Aboriginal Australian, or whether it's my nation-state identity because I'm an Australian or whatever, where other people think that they can think or make decisions on my behalf, and they use that collective label, that group membership, as a way to speak on my behalf or other people's behalves. And it's like I don't know, like say some Indigenous politician in Canberra makes, or like in the Victorian state government says something like, this is what Indigenous people in Victoria think. It's like, you haven't spoken to me. Like, how dare you fucking think that just because I'm Indigenous that you know what I think. It's completely inappropriate. But because, especially in Indigenous stuff, there's a lot of collectivization. But it's across, like, there's lots of other things. Like, so I think, like, I don't know how you would, like, articulate this properly, but there's some aspect of, like, people abstracting away the individual into, like, just a member of a set, and then therefore ascribing, like, whatever point of view or ethical whatever to that person, even if it's like an implicit membership of the set, not an actual, like, voluntary, explicit, like, I signed up to be a part of this thing. I don't know. Does that answer your question, or did I, like, dodge the question?
No. Well, it's a really hard question.
Yeah.
I can't answer it for sure myself. It sounds to me that for you, the ability to exit is important.
Yeah, voluntary exit. Like I can't exit being an Indigenous person.
like I can like legally I can de-identify in Australia. Like if you're identified as an Aboriginal person legally, I could stop doing that. But like sort of like, you know, within my social circles and stuff, it's like I'm Indigenous. Or, you know, if I wanted to leave Australia, I could exit that and give up my Australian citizenship or whatever.
Yeah, I guess sort of in a Randian paradigm, you'd say the reality of you being Indigenous is not, like, that's not something you can say, oh, I now change the objective reality of who my ancestors were.
Yeah.
But you can, like, the thing that can be exited is someone else, or should be able to be exited, is someone else presuming to speak on your behalf.
Yeah.
Like, that's the constructed.
Yeah. And there's
that's not based on, okay, well, I'm related to these people.
And
that's based on someone presuming to speak for you.
And there's a lot of things in identity politics, like Indigenous stuff is like one subset of identity politics. There's other like peoples of color, you know, all over the world, or like I don't know, like the LGBT stuff or whatever, where like you see it on Twitter, like, oh, you know, somebody's speaking on behalf of trans people and they're not trans themselves. It's like, you can't speak on behalf of trans people. Like, this is completely fucking ridiculous. You can't assume that because somebody's a member of some group that you therefore know, like, what their perspective is of it. And, you know, like, Dave Chappelle gave a really good example of this, like, where he had a trans fan who, like, supported him, and, like, he or she like disagreed with like a lot of stuff that was going on in the trans stuff, and when other people in that like community found out about it, like they harassed her online until the point that she like committed suicide. And it's like, okay, well, this person is one of you, they're a trans person, they don't hold your views, and for that you're going to vilify them. Like, this is just this is a very dangerous form of collectivization. Like, just because you happen to be a member of a set doesn't mean that you, like, along like one particular axis, doesn't mean that like you can be your like perspectives on the world can be summarized by other people making assumptions about that group. It's really dangerous.
Yeah. Okay. No, thanks for that. I get what you mean now by collectivization. Yeah. Because it's so much broader than just, for example, Marxism, on saying, okay, well, collectivization is Marxism. It's a much
that's one form of it. That's also a very dangerous form of it. But there's lots of different forms of that. Marxism seems to be a particularly vicious form of it over the last 100 years or so. But there are other forms of it, yeah. And we like the only antidote to that is individualism. As far as I'm aware. Like, I mean, I might be wrong. I don't know about that, but like, as far as I'm aware.
So given all this, I mean, I kind of expect I know what you'll say to this. Would you recommend Atlas Shrugged? And if so, to whom?
Yeah, like I would strongly recommend this book if you're somebody who's interested in building things. If you're an artist, even if you're like, I've got artist friends who are like very left leaning, and you know, I would even say to them, like, look, put your fucking like leftist stuff aside for a second and like read. This is somebody who cares about like the grandeur of the human spirit and won't fucking back down from it, and just says it's good. You know, maybe for an artist, read The Fountainhead instead or something. But just, I think people out there who are builders are constantly being held back and villainized. You know, like the environmentalist movement is just 20, 30 years of nonstop propaganda against hydrocarbons, or against 50 years of propaganda against nuclear research and development. And now it's like, okay, now we've got gene drive, and it's just like, okay, more propaganda again. Like, no actual engagement with like, what are these technologies? How do they work? What are the explanations? What are the actual risks? How can we mitigate the risk? Nothing like cold, sober. It's just all hysterical panic, precautionary principle, suffocating people who are creating knowledge and solving problems. Like, the people out there, the engineers, the scientists, the architects, the painters, the hackers, the entrepreneurs, like, they need these sorts of books that like remind them that, hey, it is good, it is virtuous to go and build things, to go and make things, to go and create.
Yeah, I agree with that strongly. Probably my favorite part of this book is that she does say making stuff is cool and good, and you should be proud to do it. In terms of recommending it, I'd say read it and skip the speeches. Every time someone starts giving a speech, flick over it and just skip that bit. You don't need to read it. So given that, I'd say, I'd probably actually recommend it. Also just because the plot is this combination of being, again, the exception being the speeches, pretty well paced, like pretty entertaining, but also just with absolutely hilarious concepts. It just some of the situations are so ridiculous. Like the Galt's Gulch is just so funny. It's just a genuinely fun plot.
I've got two more like classes of people that I'd say like should probably read it. And then I've got a question for you. So one of the classes of people I think should read it is also like one of them is like I think that like young Australian people should read this. Like
to get over the tall poppy
all the
stuff?
tall poppy bullshit, man. Like it's a bunch of garbage. We don't need that.
I fucking hate tall poppy.
Fuck all that.
That's just I lose so much respect for someone when I see that.
Yeah, and it's garbage. Like, what is the point of that? We want, like, in Australia, or anywhere in the world, not just Australia, anywhere in the fucking world, like, we want great doctors, we want great scientists, we want great writers, we want great cartoonists. Like, we want people to go and do whatever, like, art is to them to go and make that art. And it benefits them. They get to have a meaningful vocation, and it benefits everybody fucking else. You know, so like in Australia, I think fuck off this tall poppy stuff. And if like Ayn Rand or like I don't know maybe some other like adjacent texts or whatever, or like people can like help snap that shit out of the Australian zeitgeist, yeah, that'd be good. And the other type of people I'd recommend it to is just people who are interested in sci-fi. Like I do think it's a good sci-fi book. I think what's really interesting about her sci-fi is that she picked rather like interesting technologies to make, because like if you read Heinlein or like some cypherpunk shit, you know, like Snow Crash or something,
like Neuromancer,
yeah, it's like really heavy like on the tech. But this is like, it's not so heavy on the tech, but it's interesting her choice of technology. Like the choice of like a metal is a really interesting technology to like create for a world, because like the two of the most important metals, I can give you three unbelievably important metals, like copper for moving electrical energy, aluminium, light enough to create things like airplanes that we can use for like lighter than air travel, and steel that we can create like all these structures out of that are unbelievably strong. Like those three metals, we don't have them. We don't have modern civilization. So she was really insightful about that and like the motor and stuff. Like really interesting sci-fi.
Big problem I have with that though is that Dagny Taggart is running a train service, like mass transport by a fucking car, you communist. That's bullshit.
True. So my question for you was,
Dagny Taggart should have been making Teslas.
My question for you was kind of like an inverse of what you said, or like kind of like throw it back to you. Like, since you've lived now in Australia and Czech a lot, and as Czech was like a former communist country, but also, I mean, you've done a fair bit of travel to other countries, you know, like, so I guess given your experience with like post-communist countries and like you know, the European Union and like the looming threat of Russia and all this sort of shit, like, do you have some perspectives on this broad range of like, I suppose, memes, like the battle between the individual and the collective, or in particular the individual and the state?
So while Ayn Rand can be quite obnoxious in describing everything that she agrees with as rational and everything she doesn't agree with as irrational, I think some of the background contributing to that view is still present here. So you do have a group of older people, some of whom want
really
a return of communism,
yeah,
because they basically didn't have to do anything. Like, you were just given stuff. And like, yeah, there were pretty intense restrictions on speech, where you could travel, people you could associate with, etc. But some people just don't care about that and they want to return to it. However, other people, people whom I'd regard as more rational, said that one of the biggest problems is that communism could last as long as it did because before it became communist, then Czechoslovakia was highly industrialized, very wealthy, the most industrialized part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Before that empire fell apart in the aftermath of World War One. And so there was a lot of wealth that had been generated that could effectively just be stolen and redistributed.
Yeah, so fucked up.
You can't do that for very long. There is actually a limit to how much stuff you can take and redistribute. And the problem was it wasn't productive.
Yeah.
And even if some people get nostalgic about the good old days, you actually just can't do that. This sounds dumb to say, but if you don't make stuff, there's just not going to be stuff.
Yeah.
You need to make it, and a lot of people here do have probably a better recognition of that than in Australia or even in America.
Yeah, Australians, I think, are disconnected from it.
Because those are countries where people sort of take for granted that you just have a more productive way of doing things. Do I think within the space of ideas, the capitalist systems that we have instantiated at the moment are just the most productive way to do things that we can possibly imagine?
No, of course not.
No, there are probably better ways.
Do better.
But it's better than at least the Bolshevism that used to be present here.
Yeah. And
so I think a lot of people, like for example, my father-in-law would be extremely receptive to Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah, he's a champion. Yeah. So
I'd recommend this book, but when someone's reading it and they want to skip bits, feel free to skip 20 pages. You'll be okay.
I did have one more question for you. Do you think, this is, as I said, obviously it's a fiction book and it's hyper real. And as we discussed earlier, it's also a warning or maybe even a description. It's a warning of what could happen if what she saw, what was happening in America, continued to keep on happening. And actually, Hayek famously, he wrote The Road to Serfdom, he was saying the same thing. Von Mises was saying the same thing. Milton Friedman was saying the same thing. And now the Bitcoiners in this day and age, before the Bitcoiners came on, the libertarians, in America are saying hey, this having more and more. They broadly call it socialism. I don't know if you want to just lump it all under that heading of socialism, but this idea of redistributive, whatever. And at the end of the day, if you don't have the wealth to redistribute, you're just going to be carving up a pie and it's going to get smaller and smaller and you're going to destroy the civilization. So I was wondering whilst I was reading this book, and this part of the reason why I'm so into Bitcoin is because I have this overwhelming maybe it's an irrational fear that the political ratchet is towards increasing all the things that these people warn us about, and we don't have any way out. Or at least I don't feel as though I have any way out. I can't vote for these things in Australia. Neither of the major parties represent my views on this, and so I just was wondering if you think that any of her diagnoses were relevant, or at least maybe even today, in America or Australia or in the EU where you are, how much do you think they're actually describing patterns that are actually happening?
So at least I think in a representative democracy, there is definitely that ratchet. Apart from anything else, people like being given stuff and don't like stuff being taken away. The bias is very much towards giving people things and not taking things away, or you'll get voted out. More broadly, I think that probably some degree of redistribution is necessary, apart from anything else, that it prevents violence. So,
yeah, interesting.
I think there are certain people who are just more generative than other people.
Yeah.
And they're going to accumulate resources and other people won't. And if that goes on for long enough and you have people who are really disenfranchised and living in penury, you'll get violence. I also don't want to live in a society where you have certain people living in misery,
poverty.
like completely immiserated. Like that's not a place that I want
And you
to
can
live.
see that's really bad.
So both for the reason
in the
of-
US, right? Like in some parts of the US, like they have not fucking figured that balance out. You know.
Yeah, but even in Australia, there are parts of Australia where, like say rural Victoria, there are plenty of places like Seymour or Benalla where it's not
Seymour's pretty
great.
Seymour's pretty rough.
Yeah, so I think there's just for stability. So of course, you want people to be generating things and you want people to be rewarded for making stuff. I believe very strongly in that. But even if you're just looking at it from the perspective of how do we optimize for people generating things, well, you need a degree of stability. You're not going to be very generative if there's chaos.
Yeah.
And you just need, or at least with how things have been run so far and the current set of ideas that we have, you need some redistribution to prevent instability in a political system.
Yeah. I wonder where that line is.
And how much you do that? Yeah, I don't know where that line is. If I did, I would be much better not.
I feel like that's just going to be one of those problems that's just going
really
to
hard
persist for the rest of human civilization. I don't think that's a problem that gets solved.
Yeah, well, it's also assuming there is a point. It's probably a dynamic point as well. It's going to be changing based on the context within which a society exists. So you're probably never going to get it perfect.
Yeah, I do think that like at the end of the day, though, like what we want net creation. So at the end of the day, like at least like following my I'm not going to fucking do a pop or a Deutsch rant now, but like anybody who's listened to this fucking show knows that like I'm all about that knowledge creation shit, and all wealth ultimately comes down to creating new knowledge. And so if we live in a society where we're not creating new knowledge, we're not solving the problems that we need to, and we don't have net like wealth creation, problem solving, where we're solving more problems when we're not losing solutions to problems that we've already solved, like that we need, like that's extremely fucking important. we don't want to live in a society where all of a sudden like we're like going backwards along those axes.
Also, if you're in a society which is stagnant in terms of making new ideas, any wealth gain is going to be zero sum. If there's not new wealth being created, if one person gets more wealth,
it's going to be zero
coming
sum.
at someone else's expense.
Yeah, we need it to be like in.
So and again, that's just a recipe for mass violence.
So like in order for any redistribution to like be functional, like whatever the amount you say is like, okay, this is like how much we need in order to like have stability and like get rid of, the abject poverty or whatever that we want to get rid of, that sort of stuff, like whatever that level might be, like. If it's in the context of a positive sum society where there's new ideas being created and new knowledge and problems being solved, it's like, okay, well, it can tolerate that, some degree of that. But if you don't have that because things are so stifled from regulation or whatever, or taxation or inflation and that sort of thing, then you're going to get into a zero-sum game, and then it's going to get hairy. We really don't want that.
I also say this because I have the bias towards people making new stuff. I really do think humans having new ideas is the coolest thing in the known universe.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Like, there's just what other part of the universe apprehends the universe around it.
Yeah.
Comes up with a goal, comes up with a way to achieve that goal, and then changes that local part of the universe to do that. That's just wild.
Yeah, like we brought the energetic force of the sun to the surface of the planet. Like in order to create nuclear fusion, you either require so much mass that you have to have something like the size of the sun, like the gravitational forces like smashing the atoms into one another, or you have to have explanatory knowledge in the form of like scientists and engineers building a laboratory, like in the Manhattan Project. Like those are the two places where nuclear fusion happens.
Yeah. And that Ayn Rand, for all of the obnoxiousness and missteps in the book, that she wrote a book celebrating that sort of problem solving, I think is really
I think worthwhile. So yeah, I'd recommend this book. With the caveat that skip some stuff when you get bored, like skip, like skim read the monologues and that sort of stuff. Like I fucking loved it. I thought it was a magnificent book. I'm really glad I read it.
Yeah. I think have you read The Fountain?
I've read parts of it. I think
I wonder whether
I haven't read the whole thing. I've read like half.
Because I think I might have enjoyed this less than you two because I'd read The Fountainhead and the two are
extremely similar.
Like they're not the same, but they're similar in that way. And so maybe I didn't have that novelty as well of someone is writing about how great it is to have ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think I've read about half. Yeah, I'm extremely bad at finishing fiction books. Like I think literally like the last couple of years, the only fiction books I've finished are like the ones for the show.
Atlas Shrugged
and F. Gardner. Call of the Crocodile.
1,200-page novel is one of the few that you managed to finish.
This is like good. It's good for accountability.
Look, I get that. That is in itself a good review.
It's good for accountability.
If that says anything about how much you liked this book.
And like, hey, fucking, if you don't fucking want to read it and you've just listened to this entire podcast, like, I mean, like, to be honest, like, we're better than Ayn Rand. We're way fucking better than Ayn Rand. And I'm a Giga Chad objectivist, so I can fucking say whatever I want. And motherfuckers, this was a piece. Atlas Shrugged was like a minor masterpiece. And this episode, this is culture shifting. This one.
This is the epoch-changing piece of art.
Where we just rag on
episode.
Ayn Rand's sexuality. Kinks.
No, her sexual kinks are one of the funniest bits of this book. That's one of the parts that make me like it a lot more.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't have any other questions or anything else to add.
I don't have more to say.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode.
We'll leave people with what's probably going to be like 4 hours of Ayn Rand talk.
It's either that or 40 hours of reading the book. All right.
Yeah, actually, it's pretty efficient.
All right. See you guys.